When we think about Polynesian mythology, it is tempting to imagine a single, unified story explaining how the world began. The reality, however, is far more fascinating. Across the vast Pacific Ocean, different island societies preserve different versions of creation, and although these stories often share familiar themes, they reveal that Polynesian mythology was never a single, fixed tradition. Instead, it was a rich collection of beliefs that evolved over centuries, shaped by migration, local customs, and generations of oral storytelling. Scholars generally recognize two major traditions within Polynesian creation myths. The first describes the universe as gradually emerging through a long process of transformation. Rather than being created in an instant, the cosmos slowly developed from an endless state of darkness and emptiness. The second tradition tells a different story, in which powerful divine beings intentionally fashion the world through deliberate acts of creation. Both traditions appear throughout Polynesia, sometimes even existing side by side within the same island group. The first tradition is perhaps the most remarkable. According to these stories, the beginning of existence was known as Po, a limitless realm of darkness where nothing possessed shape, movement, warmth, or light. There was no earth beneath, no sky above, and no living creature. Everything existed only as silent potential. Over an immeasurable span of time, subtle changes began to disturb this stillness. Tiny movements emerged within the darkness. Soft whispers replaced complete silence. Gradually, the first faint traces of light appeared, much like the earliest glow before sunrise. That light slowly grew stronger, bringing warmth, moisture, and eventually substance itself. As these forces interacted, the universe became increasingly ordered, transforming from formless chaos into a structured world. Eventually, the heavens and the earth took recognizable form. Rather than remaining simple physical objects, they became living beings within Polynesian thought. The sky was personified as the Great Sky Father, while the earth became the Earth Mother. Their union marked the beginning of the living world, and from their descendants came the countless gods responsible for the sea, forests, winds, storms, mountains, and every aspect of nature. What makes this tradition especially intriguing is its philosophical depth. Instead of presenting a god who simply commands the world into existence, these myths describe creation as a natural process of gradual development. Order grows from disorder, light emerges from darkness, and life unfolds step by step. For cultures traditionally classified as non-literate societies, this sophisticated vision of cosmic evolution has surprised historians and anthropologists for generations. Some researchers have even noted striking similarities between these Polynesian ideas and ancient philosophical traditions found elsewhere in the world. Certain themes resemble early Greek speculation about the origins of the universe, while others echo concepts found in ancient Indian thought. A few comparisons have also been made with Norse mythology, where primordial forces slowly give rise to the ordered cosmos. Whether these similarities reflect shared human imagination or independent cultural development remains an open question. Among all Polynesian societies, New Zealand preserves some of the most detailed versions of these ancient creation traditions. The Maori passed these stories down orally for countless generations, and different tribal groups often preserve their own unique variations. Although the details differ, many versions describe existence unfolding through a long sequence of stages rather than through a single creative act. One tradition begins with the void, an absolute emptiness beyond human understanding. From this emptiness came light. Light gave rise to the brightness of day, and from there, existence continued unfolding through increasingly defined stages. Moisture appeared, followed by the first forms of heaven itself. Eventually, the Great Sky Father, Rangi, emerged, becoming the ancestor of numerous divine beings who would shape the world. Other Maori traditions describe the process in even greater detail. Instead of moving directly from darkness to daylight, they divide creation into many symbolic phases. The void becomes the first void, the second void, the vast void, and other successive stages, each representing another step in the universe's gradual awakening. Darkness itself is divided into different forms of night before the first dawn finally arrives. Only after this long progression do space, moisture, and the foundations of the physical world come into existence. These genealogies were not simply family trees. Every stage represented a fundamental force or condition of existence. Darkness, light, space, moisture, and even abstract concepts such as thought and consciousness were imagined as living entities connected through ancestry. In this way, the universe itself became a vast family whose generations reflected the gradual evolution of reality. One particularly poetic Maori tradition describes creation beginning with conception itself. From conception came growth. Growth produced expansion. Expansion gave rise to thought, then memory, then consciousness and desire. From these invisible forces emerged the first faint glimmer of existence, followed by endless layers of night. Only after this immense journey did daylight finally appear, bringing forth the moon, the sun, and the great sky stretching above the earth. Yet Maori mythology was never completely uniform. Some traditions tell a different story altogether. Instead of tracing the ancestry of heaven and earth back through countless generations, they simply present Rangi and Papa as eternal beings whose existence is accepted without explanation. Other stories suggest that the earth first emerged from a vast primordial ocean before later joining with the Sky Father. These differences remind us that Polynesian mythology was never a rigid religious system, but a living oral tradition, constantly adapting as stories passed from one generation to the next. Rather than weakening these traditions, their diversity makes them even more valuable. Each version preserves a different perspective on how ancient Polynesian societies understood the origins of existence. Together, they reveal a civilization that viewed the universe not as something instantly created, but as something that slowly awakened, from silence to sound, from darkness to light, and from emptiness to a living world filled with gods, humanity, and nature itself. In many Maori traditions, the story of creation continues with the growing family of Rangi, the Sky Father. Although later generations often remembered only his union with Papa, the Earth Mother, some ancient traditions describe Rangi as having several wives, each associated with different aspects of the natural world. Among these wives, Papa held the most important place. Through their union were born many of the greatest deities of Maori belief, including Teine, who would become closely associated with forests and life itself, Tu, linked with warfare and humanity, Rongo, connected to peace and cultivated food, and numerous other divine beings who governed every part of the world. One dramatic episode tells of Papa's earlier marriage to Tangaroa, the great deity of the sea. While Tangaroa was away, Papa joined Rangi instead. When the sea god returned and discovered what had happened, he confronted the Sky Father in battle. During the conflict, Tangaroa struck Rangi with a spear, wounding him in the thigh. Even so, the Sky Father continued to father more divine descendants, and the story became one of rivalry, betrayal, and the complex relationships that shaped the earliest age of the gods. Some traditions go even further, describing Rangi as taking additional wives after Papa. These unions produced many more supernatural beings, although few achieved the same importance as the children born from heaven and earth together. Despite these differing genealogies, one idea remained remarkably consistent throughout Maori tradition. The partnership of Rangi and Papa stood at the center of creation. Their relationship became the foundation upon which the rest of the universe was built. Unlike many mythologies that attempt to explain the origins of every divine figure, Maori traditions often leave one mystery unanswered. While some stories trace the Sky Father's ancestry back through the endless darkness of the primordial void, the Earth Mother usually appears without any explanation of where she came from. She simply exists as one of the fundamental realities of creation, eternal and unquestioned. This variety of traditions suggests that Maori mythology was never a single, fixed belief system. Different tribes preserved different memories, combining older legends with newer interpretations over many centuries. Some versions emphasize the gradual, evolution of the cosmos from darkness into light, while others begin directly with the eternal union of heaven and earth. Rather than contradicting one another, these traditions reveal how a living oral culture could preserve multiple explanations of the world's beginnings at the same time. Modern historians believe this diversity reflects the complex history of New Zealand itself. By the time Europeans first arrived, the islands were inhabited not only by the descendants of the great Polynesian migrations, but also by the surviving communities of earlier settlers whose traditions had gradually blended together. As these cultures merged, so too did their myths, creating the rich and sometimes contradictory stories recorded in later centuries. Clues to these older beliefs may survive among the Moriori of the Chatham Islands, whose ancestors left New Zealand before the later waves of migration transformed Maori society. Although only fragments of their traditions remain, they present a noticeably simpler picture of creation. Instead of describing a long sequence of cosmic evolution, Moriori accounts begin directly with Rangi and Papa as the original parents of existence, offering little explanation for how they themselves came into being. If these fragments truly preserve an older tradition, they may represent an earlier stage of Polynesian mythology, one in which the famous evolutionary sequence from darkness to light had not yet fully developed. Over time, more philosophical ideas may have been added, gradually transforming simple ancestral stories into elaborate cosmological systems. A similar, yet even more elaborate vision appears in the Marquesas Islands. Here, creation begins not with a fully formed world, but with an immeasurable void filled with restless motion. The emptiness trembles, swells, churns, and stirs, as though existence itself is struggling to awaken. From this ceaseless movement emerge countless invisible supports, foundations, and structures that gradually prepare the universe for creation. Unlike the Maori traditions, which eventually focus on the family of the Sky Father, Marquesan mythology continues pushing the story further back toward absolute nothingness and further forward toward the formation of matter itself. Instead of explaining only how the gods came into being, these myths attempt to explain how existence, space, stability, and physical reality emerged from complete emptiness. Because of this, many scholars see the Marquesan tradition as one of the most philosophically sophisticated creation narratives found anywhere in Polynesia. Rather than describing a single creative event, it portrays the universe as a gradual unfolding of increasingly complex stages, where abstract ideas such as order, balance, and stability appear long before the physical world itself. Another Marquesan tradition presents creation in a more dramatic way. At the beginning of time, the universe was ruled by darkness and silence, two primordial powers that dominated the endless void. But eventually, light emerged and drove darkness away. Later, sound arose from light and overcame silence. Only after these great cosmic struggles did dawn appear, opening the way for the birth of new gods and the formation of heaven and earth. This version introduces another important idea: the presence of a supreme primordial deity existing before the familiar gods. Such a concept is largely absent from many traditional Maori accounts, yet elsewhere in Polynesia it became increasingly significant. In some later traditions, this ultimate creator stood above all other divine beings, serving as the original source from which both the universe and the gods themselves ultimately descended. These different traditions demonstrate that Polynesian mythology was never static. Across thousands of miles of ocean, communities preserved shared themes while continually adapting them into new forms. Some emphasized ancestry, others cosmic evolution, and still others the power of a supreme creator. Together, they form one of the richest and most intellectually sophisticated collections of creation stories found anywhere in the ancient world. As Polynesian traditions spread across thousands of islands, their creation stories continued to evolve, producing new interpretations while preserving older ideas. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the islands of central Polynesia, where the creator figure Tangaroa, known in different regions as Taroa, Kanaloa, or Tanawa, became increasingly central to the story of the universe. In the Society Islands, creation no longer begins simply with darkness or an endless sequence of cosmic stages. Instead, it begins with a single, eternal being. Before the existence of heaven, earth, oceans, or humanity, only Taroa existed. He stood alone in limitless space, with nothing around him to answer his voice. There was no world to inhabit, and no life to accompany him. Eventually, however, Taroa himself became the universe. Rather than existing outside creation, he transformed into it. The earth, the rocks, the light, and even the hidden forces that sustained existence were understood as expressions of his own being. According to these traditions, Taroa gathered together the raw foundations of the world, shaping the earth and raising the heavens above it. Light replaced darkness, order replaced stillness, and the structure of the cosmos gradually emerged. The universe was not built from materials separate from its creator. It was the physical manifestation of Taroa himself. Another version from the Society Islands presents a slightly different picture while preserving the same central idea. In this account, Taroa embraced a sacred rock that contained the potential for all creation. From this primordial foundation came the earth and the sea. Later, the heavens themselves received the power to produce clouds, the sun, the moon, the stars, rain, thunder, and wind. The earth, once lifeless, was granted the ability to bring forth mountains, forests, rivers, flowers, animals, birds, and every other living thing. Even the oceans were filled with coral reefs, fish, and countless marine creatures through this creative process. These traditions represent a significant shift in Polynesian religious thought. Earlier myths often described the universe as developing naturally from darkness through a gradual chain of generations. Here, however, everything ultimately depends on one supreme divine being. Taroa is no longer simply one god among many. He is the ultimate source from which the entire cosmos originates. In many ways, he resembles a universal creative force whose existence precedes both nature and the other gods. Although this concept reached its fullest expression in the Society Islands, traces of a similar belief also appear in New Zealand. Some Maori traditions speak of Lo, a mysterious and transcendent deity who existed before heaven, earth, or even light itself. Surrounded only by darkness and endless waters, Lo spoke words that transformed reality. Light emerged from darkness, the heavens rose into place, the waters separated, and the earth took form beneath the newly created sky. Rather than shaping the world through physical labor, Lo created by the power of command, bringing order out of chaos through divine speech alone. Not every Polynesian island preserved the same version of creation. The traditions of the Cook Islands differ considerably from both the Maori and Society Island accounts. Instead of focusing on the birth of the universe itself, they describe the genealogy of the gods. The cosmos already exists, imagined as a vast hollow shell containing different levels of reality. At its deepest point dwells a powerful female deity associated with the very beginning of existence. From her come several important divine beings, including Vatea, a figure connected with light and the sky. Vatea later unites with Papa, the earth, and together they become the parents of many of the major Polynesian gods, including Tangaroa, Rongo, and Tane. Although this story shares familiar elements with other Polynesian traditions, particularly the union of sky and earth, it offers little explanation for how the universe itself first came into existence. Many historians therefore suspect that parts of the original Cook Islands creation tradition may simply have been lost before they could be recorded. When all of these traditions are compared, a fascinating pattern begins to emerge. The Maori stories emphasize the gradual evolution of existence from primordial darkness into the union of Sky Father and Earth Mother. The Marquesan traditions expand this developmental process into an even more elaborate philosophical system, tracing creation through countless abstract stages before the material world appears. The Society Islands place far greater emphasis on a supreme creator, Taroa, whose own being becomes the universe itself. Meanwhile, the Cook Islands preserve a more genealogical tradition centered on the ancestry of the gods rather than the birth of the cosmos. Among all Polynesian creation stories, however, perhaps the most unusual comes from Hawaii. The Hawaiian tradition begins with an idea rarely found elsewhere in Polynesia. Instead of creation emerging from absolute nothingness, the new universe is born from the remains of an earlier world that had already passed away. The old cosmos had fallen into ruin, and from its fading shadow, a new cycle of existence slowly began. Creation unfolds through a series of distinct ages. Life first appears in the depths of darkness, with the simplest marine organisms, including coral and primitive sea life. These are followed by worms, shellfish, and increasingly complex creatures, each generation replacing those before it in a continuous struggle for survival. At the same time, the first plants begin growing both beneath the sea and upon the emerging land. As countless generations live and die, their remains gradually accumulate, raising solid ground above the surrounding waters. One extraordinary figure watches this process from beginning to end: a lone octopus, believed to be the sole survivor of the previous world. While everything else is new, this mysterious creature serves as a living connection between two different creations. As the ages continue, insects, birds, fish, whales, and larger animals appear one after another. Forests spread across the land, daylight slowly overcomes the darkness, and increasingly complex forms of life emerge. Finally, after countless stages of development, peace replaces the chaos of creation. Only then do humanity and some of the higher gods enter the world. Unlike most other Polynesian myths, the Hawaiian account closely resembles a sequence of natural evolution. Rather than presenting creation as a single miraculous event, it portrays life advancing through successive stages, from simple organisms to increasingly complex plants, animals, and eventually human beings. Although deeply mythological in its imagery, this gradual progression makes the Hawaiian creation story one of the most distinctive and intellectually remarkable cosmologies preserved anywhere in the Pacific. Among the many creation stories preserved across Polynesia, the Hawaiian tradition stands apart for several remarkable reasons. Unlike most other myths, it does not describe the universe emerging from absolute nothingness. Instead, the present world is born from the remains of an earlier one, a previous creation that had already come to an end. The old universe faded away, and from its ruins a new cycle of existence slowly began. Another unique feature is the way life develops. Rather than beginning with fully formed gods or humans, creation starts with the simplest living organisms. Primitive sea life appears first, followed by increasingly complex plants and animals. Each generation replaces the one before it, creating a long sequence that resembles a gradual evolution of life. Even the land itself is imagined as slowly rising from the accumulated remains of countless generations of living creatures. Unlike the creation traditions of New Zealand, the Hawaiian myths also place much less emphasis on the familiar figures of the Sky Father and Earth Mother. Instead of focusing on divine parents whose descendants populate the universe, these stories portray the gods themselves as emerging only after the natural world has already taken shape. In this sense, the universe comes first, and the gods become part of its continuing development rather than existing before creation began. Despite these differences, the Hawaiian tradition still belongs to the broader evolutionary pattern found throughout much of Polynesia. Creation unfolds gradually through a series of connected stages instead of resulting from a single act of divine creation. Yet even in Hawaii, there was no single accepted version of the beginning. Different communities preserved different stories, and some traditions even claimed that several gods had existed before chaos itself, demonstrating once again that Polynesian mythology remained wonderfully diverse rather than completely unified. The idea of gradual cosmic development appears most strongly in New Zealand, the Marquesas, and Hawaii. Farther west, however, these themes become less prominent. Instead, older evolutionary traditions survive only in fragments, gradually giving way to new stories centered on divine creators. In Samoa, for example, one tradition begins with a long genealogy, not of gods, but of rocks and cliffs. From these ancient foundations eventually comes an octopus, whose descendants include fire and water. Conflict soon erupts between their offspring, and water ultimately triumphs, destroying the world in a great flood. After this catastrophe, the creator god Tangaloa restores the universe, introducing both destruction and renewal into the Polynesian vision of creation. Other Samoan traditions continue the genealogical approach in a different way. They trace the ancestry of important ruling families through generations of natural forces: rocks, clouds, winds, dew, daylight, and the heavens themselves. Instead of presenting isolated gods, these stories describe the entire natural world as one vast family whose successive generations eventually lead to Tangaloa. Although simpler than the elaborate cosmologies of New Zealand or Hawaii, they still preserve the idea that existence unfolds gradually through interconnected stages. A few Samoan accounts even describe the evolution of plant life, with one form giving rise to another over successive generations. While these stories never become as detailed as the Hawaiian sequence of living organisms, they reveal that the concept of gradual development remained an important element of Polynesian thought long after other traditions had begun to change. In Tonga, however, this evolutionary theme almost disappears altogether. The surviving traditions focus instead on a very different explanation for how the world began. Here, we encounter what scholars often call the creative tradition of Polynesian mythology. Rather than describing the universe slowly unfolding from darkness or chaos, these stories begin with an already existing heavenly realm where the gods live. Beneath this celestial world lies only an endless ocean stretching in every direction. According to Samoan tradition, the creator god Tangaloa looked down from heaven and saw a lonely stone floating upon the waters. He lifted it into the sky, shaped it into human form, breathed life into it, and took it as his companion. From their union came a bird, which Tangaloa sent down to explore the empty sea below. Realizing that the bird had nowhere to rest, Tangaloa cast a great rock into the ocean. In time, this rock became the first land. When the bird returned complaining that the island offered no shade, the god sent down a vine to cover it. Later, however, he destroyed the vine, and from the worms that fed upon its decaying remains, humanity was eventually created. In this version, people arise not directly from the gods, but through an unexpected chain of natural transformation. The central idea is very different from the evolutionary myths. The world does not slowly emerge from chaos through countless generations. Instead, it is intentionally established by a creator who already exists in the heavens. The gods precede the universe rather than being born from it. A closely related tradition survives in Tonga. Here, several heavenly beings dwell together before the earth exists. One of them, the divine messenger Tangaloa, is sent to search the endless sea below for land. At first, he finds nothing except a distant sandbank barely visible above the waves. Returning to heaven, he reports his discovery, only to be instructed to wait before searching again. When he returns, the small sandbank has grown into solid land. Later, wishing to provide a place where the heavenly messenger can live, another divine being scatters wood chips and shavings from his celestial workshop into the sea. These fragments become the island of Iwa, one of the oldest islands in Tongan tradition. Even then, the island remains barren. To solve this, the heavenly ruler gives Tangaloa a single seed. Once planted, it grows into an enormous vine that spreads across the entire island, covering the once empty landscape with life. From this humble beginning, the living world gradually expands. These Western Polynesian traditions reveal a profound shift in the understanding of creation. In the Eastern Islands, the universe often develops naturally through successive stages of existence, with the gods emerging as part of that process. In Samoa and Tonga, however, the gods already inhabit a heavenly realm before the world exists. Creation becomes an intentional act directed from above, and the earth itself is established piece by piece through the decisions of divine beings. Beyond Samoa and Tonga, the idea of gods creating land from a heavenly realm appears only in scattered fragments. In several island traditions, the beginning of existence is described as an endless ocean with no visible land. A god either floats upon the waters, travels across them, or searches for a place where life might begin. In one tradition from the Society Islands, only a solitary deity existed at first. Beneath him stretched a limitless body of water covering the abyss, while another divine figure drifted across its surface. A similar story from the Marquesas tells of Tiki, an ancient god who sailed alone upon the primordial sea. Finding no land, he lowered a line into the depths and pulled the first island up from the ocean floor. These stories closely resemble Samoan accounts in which Tangaroa journeys above the waters looking for somewhere to rest. They preserve the same basic image, a divine being surrounded by an empty sea before the appearance of the world. Yet each island reshaped the idea according to its own religious traditions. Another Society Islands account places Taroa alone in the heavens. From himself he brings forth a daughter, and together they stand upon a sacred rock rising from the sea. From this foundation they form the earth, the heavens, and the ocean. Here creation is not a gradual natural process. It is a deliberate act carried out by divine beings who already existed before the world. Tongan mythology also speaks of an original ocean and a distant homeland of the gods. From this celestial region, the hero Maui travels across the waters and raises the islands of Tonga from the depths. The famous image of Maui fishing up land appears throughout Polynesia, although it may belong to a separate group of traditions rather than to the older heavenly creation stories. Another remarkable idea found in Polynesian mythology is the cosmic egg. According to one tradition from the Society Islands, Taroa initially existed inside an egg hidden within complete darkness. When the proper moment arrived, he broke free and began the process of creation. In Hawaii, the story takes a different form. A great bird flies above the primordial waters and lays an egg upon their surface. The egg eventually opens by itself, and from it, the world emerges. A related New Zealand tradition tells of another enormous bird that drops an egg into the endless sea. After floating for some time, the shell breaks apart, revealing an elderly man and woman, a young boy and girl, a canoe, a dog, and a pig. They enter the canoe and drift across the ocean until they finally reach New Zealand. The cosmic egg is not unique to Polynesia. Similar stories appear in several ancient cultures, especially in South and Southeast Asia. This resemblance has led some scholars to wonder whether the idea reached Polynesia through ancient migrations from the Indonesian world, where Indian religious and cultural influences had become established during the early centuries of the Common Era. According to this interpretation, later groups moving eastward into Polynesia may have carried the cosmic egg tradition with them. From central Polynesia, the story could then have traveled north toward Hawaii and south toward New Zealand, while long-distance contact between the islands was still active. This remains a possibility rather than a certainty, since similar myths can also arise independently in different cultures. Across Polynesia, simple statements claiming that a deity created the sky, earth, sun, moon, plants, animals, and human beings are extremely common. Although such accounts are less detailed than the great creation narratives, they reveal an important distinction. Some Polynesian myths imagine the universe gradually developing through successive generations, while others believe that gods intentionally brought it into existence. These traditions can therefore be divided into two broad patterns. The first is the genealogical or developmental tradition, in which darkness, light, space, nature, the gods, and humanity emerge through a long sequence. The second is the creative tradition, in which one or more divine beings already exist and deliberately shape the world. The developmental tradition is especially elaborate in New Zealand and Hawaii. It also appears strongly in the Marquesas, where abstract ideas and natural forces form long genealogical chains. In central and western Polynesia, however, these older sequences are often replaced or transformed by myths about active creator gods. Samoa preserves the clearest version of the heavenly creation tradition, while related elements also survive in Tonga, the Marquesas, and the Society Islands. The importance of genealogy in Polynesian society may help explain why so many creation myths took the form of family histories. Polynesians carefully remembered the names of their ancestors, sometimes tracing family lines back through dozens of generations. chiefs frequently claimed descent from gods, using their sacred ancestry to support their political authority. Within such a culture, it was natural to imagine that the gods, the islands, the sky, the sea, and even abstract forces such as darkness and light also possessed ancestors. The entire universe could be understood as one enormous genealogy. Every natural object or cosmic condition became part of a family extending back toward the beginning of existence. Yet these myths were more than enlarged family trees. They also reveal a serious attempt to understand how the visible world emerged from invisible beginnings. Polynesian thinkers tried to explain how solid matter could arise from emptiness, how daylight could emerge from darkness, and how life could develop from forces that possessed no physical shape. The environment of the Pacific may have influenced these ideas. Polynesian communities lived on relatively small islands surrounded by an ocean that seemed endless. Their islands appeared permanent and unmoving, while the sea around them was always shifting, rising, falling, and changing. This contrast between stable land and restless water may have encouraged stories about the gradual formation of order within a constantly moving universe. The islands themselves could easily be imagined as having risen from the sea, been pulled from its depths, or dropped from the heavens. The vast ocean was not merely part of the landscape. It shaped how people understood distance, creation, survival, and the boundaries of the known world. Still, the environment alone cannot explain every similarity between Polynesian and Asian traditions. Ideas such as the cosmic egg and the universe emerging from an abstract, primordial state resemble ancient Indian and Southeast Asian cosmologies. It is possible that some of these themes were carried eastward by the ancestors of the Polynesians before they entered the remote Pacific. The evidence remains uncertain, and the issue cannot be solved by examining Polynesia alone. Similar myths from Indonesia and other parts of Oceania must also be compared before the origins of these traditions can be understood more clearly. What can be said with confidence is that Polynesian mythology developed through a combination of inherited ideas, local innovation, migration, and centuries of oral transmission. After explaining the origins of the universe, Polynesian myths turn to another fundamental question: where did human beings come from? Once again, there is no single answer. Several different traditions developed across the islands. In some stories, a god directly shapes the first man and woman from clay or earth. In others, a deity creates a woman and later takes her as his wife, making humanity partly divine. Some traditions describe human beings as the direct descendants of gods, while others present humanity as the final result of a longer process of transformation. Maori mythology preserves several examples of direct human creation. In one account, Tani decides to make a being unlike anything that has existed before. He gathers earth and slowly shapes it according to an image formed in his mind. He gives the figure a head, arms, legs, a chest, and every other part of the human body. When the form is complete, Tane raises it from the ground and brings it to life. The first man is named Tiki, who becomes the earliest human inhabitant of the world. Tana then realizes that Tiki needs a companion. Once again, he works with the sacred soil, creating the first woman and uniting the pair so that humanity can spread across the earth. Other Maori traditions give Tiki a more active role. In these versions, Tiki is himself a divine being who creates the first man. He forms the body from red clay, sometimes mixing the earth with his own blood. The use of divine blood creates a direct bond between humanity and the supernatural world. A closely related story appears in Hawaii. There, three major gods, Kane, Ku, and Lono, work together to create the first human being. They use red earth mixed with divine saliva and shape the body in the likeness of Kane. When the figure is ready, the gods breathe life into it and command it to rise. The lifeless image awakens and becomes the first man. Tahiti preserves a similar tradition, although Taroa takes the role of creator. These stories share a powerful idea. Human beings are formed from the substance of the earth, but receive life directly from the gods. Humanity therefore belongs to both the natural and divine worlds. Another widespread tradition begins not with the creation of a man, but with Tain's search for a suitable mother of humanity. In one Maori account, Tain first considers forming a union with Papa, the Earth Mother. She refuses and directs him toward other female beings. Tan follows her guidance, but every union produces something other than humanity. One wife gives birth to the great totara tree. Another produces mountain waters and strange creatures associated with the highlands. A later union brings forth stone, while others produce grasses, reeds, and flax. Each attempt contributes something to the natural world, yet none gives Tain the human child he seeks. Forests, rocks, plants, waters, and animals come into existence, but mankind remains absent. Frustrated, Taine returns repeatedly to Papa, searching for an answer. At last, Papa sends him to a sacred place near the ocean. There, Tane gathers reddish earth and begins shaping it into the body of a woman. He forms the head, arms, torso, and legs, carefully completing every feature. When the figure is finished, he brings it to life and names her Haini Ahu 1, the woman formed from earth. She becomes the first true human woman and the mother through whom humanity enters the world. Her creation marks a turning point in Maori mythology. The Age of. Purely divine beings begins to give way to the age of humankind, yet humans remain inseparably connected to the gods, the land, and the sacred earth from which the first woman was shaped. After creating Hineahu 1 from the earth, Tain took her as his wife. Their first offspring, however, was not yet fully human. One tradition states that she first produced Tiki Tohua, a sacred egg from which all the birds of the sky eventually descended. After this came a daughter named Tiki Kapakapa, and only later was a truly human child born. This sequence reflects an important idea found throughout Polynesian mythology. Humanity did not always appear immediately. The first unions of gods often produced trees, animals, stones, winds, or other forces of nature before human life finally emerged. Creation was imagined as a long process of experimentation in which the natural world took shape before mankind entered it. Another Maori account tells the story more simply. Tane first united with a tree, but their descendants were only trees. Realizing that this would never produce humanity, he traveled to the shore of Hawaii. There, he mixed mud with sand and shaped the material into the body of a woman. Once the figure was complete, Tain covered her, leaned close, and breathed life into her mouth. He then stepped away and waited. When he returned, the woman had begun to move. She trembled, looked around with curiosity, and tried to understand the strange world before her. Finally, she turned, saw Taini standing behind her, and laughed. He reached out his hand, raised her, and took her as his wife. This moment is one of the most vivid scenes in Maori mythology. Humanity begins not with a violent act or a sudden divine command, but with awakening, movement, curiosity, and recognition. The first woman comes to life slowly and sees the world before understanding her own place within it. Related traditions were known elsewhere in Polynesia. In the Society Islands, the god Ti created a woman from the earth and lived with her. Their descendants later became the ancestors of mankind. In the Marquesas, Tiki was also said to have shaped a wife for himself from the sands of the shore. These similarities reveal a shared Polynesian image of human creation. The first woman is formed from the land itself, usually by a male deity who later becomes her companion. Humanity therefore descends from both divine power and the physical earth. Other traditions, however, do not describe human beings as artificial creations. Instead, they present mankind as the direct descendant of the gods. In the Cook Islands, the people of Mangaya trace their ancestry to 3 sons of Rongo, one of the major Polynesian deities. The divine ancestry of their wives is not always explained, yet the tradition clearly presents humanity as emerging from a sacred family line rather than from clay or sand. The Marquesans preserved a similar belief. According to their genealogies, humanity descended from Ti Tapu, himself connected through earlier generations to the divine figures Atea and Atanua. Human beings were therefore members of the same enormous family as the gods, the sky, the dawn, and the forces of creation. Hawaiian tradition develops this idea on an even larger scale. In one great creation chant, humanity and the major gods arise from the same cosmic powers. Brightness and peaceful stillness produce a primordial female being, and from her come both divine figures and ki, the Hawaiian form of tiki, and the ancestor of mankind. In some versions, Ki fathers humanity through a union with his own mother. Such episodes may appear disturbing from a modern perspective, but in mythological traditions, they often express the idea that all existence originated from a very small number of sacred beings. Before the world became fully populated, ordinary social boundaries had not yet been established. Another Hawaiian account tells of La'ila'i, the first woman, who emerged directly from Po, the ancient realm of darkness. A sky god looked down from above, saw her, and descended to take her as his wife. From their union came the human race. Here, humanity is neither shaped from clay nor gradually transformed from lower forms of life. Men and women are born directly from the meeting of primordial darkness and the heavens. Human ancestry is therefore entirely cosmic and divine. The most detailed version of this tradition comes from Tahiti. In this account, Haina, the daughter and companion of Taaroa, observes that the gods already exist within the darkness of the primordial world, yet there are still no human beings. She asks how mankind can be brought into existence. Taaroa sends her to search for a mysterious figure called Ti Maratai. Hina travels inland but finds no one. She then searches the coast and sea, yet her efforts remain unsuccessful. While she is away, Taaroa considers how humanity might be created. Instead of simply shaping a human body, he transforms himself, taking on the physical substance and appearance of a man. When Hina returns, she meets this unfamiliar figure but fails to recognize him. He introduces himself as Ti Maratai, the very being she has been seeking. Hina accepts him as her brother and companion, and they live together as husband and wife. Their son, named Ti, becomes the firstborn ancestor of humanity. This story combines several different ideas. Taaroa is both a god and the first man. Ti is both humanity's earliest ancestor and a divine descendant. Hina is at once a goddess, wife, sister, and mother of the human race. Such overlapping identities appear frequently in Polynesian mythology. Tiki, or Ti, may be described as the first man in one story, the creator of mankind in another, and the divine ancestor of humanity in a third. The first woman may appear human in one tradition but become a powerful goddess in another. This confusion is not accidental. Polynesian myths did not always separate gods, ancestors, natural forces, and human beings into clearly defined categories. A single figure could represent several of these at once. The ancestor of a tribe might also be a god, while a goddess might also personify the earth, night, dawn, or death. These traditions were also shaped by the powerful desire to connect human ancestry with the divine world. Genealogy was central to Polynesian society, and sacred descent gave authority and prestige to ruling families. By tracing humanity back to gods, myths connected every generation to the beginnings of the cosmos. Some stories move away from direct divine creation and suggest that the first human being emerged through a natural process. One unusual New Zealand tradition claims that a plant growing in wetlands possessed a male generative force. This force united with red clay exposed in the earth, and from that union, the first man came into existence. A deity discovered this being before daylight had fully appeared in the world. The surrounding chant describes life developing within darkness, where movement, desire, sound, and vitality slowly arise from silence. Humanity seems to grow from the hidden powers of nature rather than from the hands of a creator. Yet even this first man cannot be understood as an ordinary human being. He is described as the ancestor of the figure who later separated heaven from earth, an achievement usually attributed to great gods such as Tain. The story therefore blurs the boundary between man and deity once again. The strongest example of humanity emerging through transformation rather than direct creation appears in Samoa. Samoan mythology had already described the earth as a rock lowered or cast down from heaven by Tangaloa. Plants were then sent to cover the barren surface and make it suitable for life. Eventually, these creeping vines withered and began to decay. Worms appeared among their rotting stems. According to some versions, the worms gradually changed into human beings. In others, Tangaloa collected them and shaped them into men and women. A fuller version begins in an age when only the heavens were inhabited and the entire earth remained beneath the sea. Tangaloa sent his daughter downward in the form of a bird to search for a place where she might rest. After flying across the endless waters, she discovered a single rock rising slightly above the surface. She returned to heaven and told her father what she had seen. Tangaloa sent her back repeatedly, and each time the dry ground had spread farther across the sea. When enough land had appeared, Tangaloa gave her earth and a creeping plant to place upon the barren rock. On her next journey, the vine had begun to spread. When she returned again, it was dying and decomposing. During a later visit, she found the decaying plant covered in worms. On her final journey, the transformation was complete. The worms had become men and women, and the once empty earth was now inhabited by humanity. This Samoan story brings together several major Polynesian themes. Land rises from the sea, life is carried down from the heavens, plants prepare the earth for habitation, and human beings emerge through a gradual process of transformation. Unlike the Maori accounts, no deity carefully shapes a human body from clay. Unlike the Tahitian traditions, humanity is not born through the union of gods. Instead, people develop from living creatures found within the remains of the first vegetation. The story may appear unusual, but it fits the wider Polynesian belief that life could pass from one form into another. Plants, animals, humans, gods, and natural forces were not always separated by permanent boundaries. They belonged to a connected universe in which transformation was both possible and expected. Taken together, these myths reveal at least 4 major explanations for the origin of mankind. Some traditions claim that gods formed human beings directly from earth, sand, or clay. Others tell of a first woman created by a deity who later became her husband. A third group traces humanity directly to divine parents. Finally, several myths describe mankind emerging through a gradual transformation from plants, worms, or the hidden forces of nature. These stories differ greatly, yet they share one central belief. Humanity could never be separated from the world around it. Men and women came from sacred earth, divine breath, primordial darkness, decaying vegetation, or the bodies of the gods themselves. In every version, human life remained deeply connected to the land, the sea, the ancestors, and the powers that first brought the universe into existence. In some Samoan traditions, the first human beings did not immediately possess a recognizable human form. When they emerged from worms, they were described as shapeless creatures, existing somewhere between raw life and completed humanity. Only later did they acquire the bodies of men and women. A related story appears in Tonga. There, a sandpiper scratched worms from the beach and left them beneath the heat of the sun. As they decayed and transformed, human life eventually emerged from them. The bird plays an important role in both Tongan and Samoan mythology. In Samoa, a similar bird was regarded as the daughter or messenger of the creator god Tangaloa, sent down from heaven to inspect the newly formed earth. In one version, the bird collected the worms that had appeared among the dead vines and carried them to Tangaloa. The god then shaped these creatures into human beings. In another version, the transformation happened naturally, with the worms gradually becoming men and women without being directly molded by a deity. Outside Samoa and Tonga, this exact story is rare. A possible echo survives in the Society Islands, where the first humans were said to have been round and featureless, almost like living balls. Their arms and legs were pulled outward only later, giving them a completed human shape. This image of an unfinished creature gradually becoming human also appears in parts of Indonesia and Australia. Its presence across such widely separated regions suggests that the story may preserve a very ancient mythological idea carried through migration and cultural contact. Another unusual explanation for the origin of humanity comes from the Chatham Islands. According to this tradition, two divine beings placed a clot of blood inside the hollow of a tree. Through supernatural power, the blood developed into the first human being. This story has no close parallel in most of Polynesia, although Samoan myths sometimes describe minor gods emerging from blood in a similar way. Comparable accounts are much more common in Melanesia, where human beings or important ancestors are frequently born from blood, trees, stones, or other natural substances. The Chatham Islands tradition may therefore preserve traces of an older cultural layer. The ancestors of the Moriori reached the islands before many later Maori traditions became dominant in New Zealand, and their mythology may contain ideas inherited from earlier contacts with Melanesian populations. On the island of Niue, humanity was believed to have originated from a tree. Although the details are limited, the story resembles the Maori account in which Tane married a tree and produced living beings and lesser deities. These myths reveal how often Polynesian traditions connected humanity with plants, forests, earth, and the living landscape. The great variety of these stories makes one fact clear. There was never a single Polynesian explanation for the creation of mankind. Humans could emerge from clay, divine breath, worms, blood, trees, darkness, or direct descent from the gods. Each island community preserved its own combination of inherited beliefs and local traditions. The same complexity appears in Polynesian accounts of the universe. Creation myths often contain several different layers, combining stories of natural development with tales of deliberate divine action. Similarities with myths farther west in Melanesia, Micronesia, Indonesia, and Southeast Asia suggest that many Polynesian traditions were shaped before the settlement of the remote Pacific was complete. After explaining how the world and humanity first appeared, Maori mythology turns to one of its most powerful stories, the separation of the Sky Father and the Earth Mother. In the beginning, Rangi, the Sky Father, descended toward Papa Anuku, the Earth Mother, and embraced her. At that time, there was no sun, moon, starlight, wind, or clear sky. The world was silent, motionless, and completely dark. Rangi covered Papa with trees and plants, clothing her bare body with forests. He placed insects among the vegetation, shellfish along the coast, and living creatures throughout the waters and the land. The world possessed the potential for life, but it remained trapped beneath the body of the Sky Father. Rangi and Papa held one another so tightly that no space existed between them. Their many divine children were forced to live within the narrow darkness created by their embrace. The gods were crowded together, unable to stand properly or see the world around them. Some crawled through the darkness, others lay twisted on their sides or backs. Some stood with bent heads or raised arms, searching blindly for room to move. Although life had begun, nothing could grow freely and no plant could fully mature or produce fruit. For a long time, the children endured this condition. Eventually, they began discussing how they might escape. They had never seen light, but they sensed that another kind of existence might be possible beyond the darkness. The fiercest brother, Tumatawenga, god of warfare and human conflict, proposed a violent solution. He argued that their parents should be killed so that the children could finally be free. Tanemahuta, god of forests, birds, and all things made from wood, opposed him. He believed that Rangi and Papa should not be destroyed. Instead, they should be separated. Rangi could remain far above as the sky, while Papa would stay below as the earth and continue nourishing her children. Most of the brothers accepted Tane's plan. Only Tauhiri Matea, Lord of Winds and Storms, resisted. He loved his parents and feared that their separation would destroy the world he knew. While the others prepared to act, Tauhiri Matea mourned the coming division. One by one, the gods attempted to force heaven and earth apart. Rongo, associated with cultivated crops and peace, rose first but lacked the necessary strength. Tangaroa, lord of the sea and its creatures, also tried and failed. Hamia Tike Tike, guardian of wild plants and uncultivated food, placed all his strength into the effort, but Rangi and Papa remained locked together. Tumatawenga then attempted to separate them through force, yet even the god of war could not break their embrace. At last, Tanemahuta came forward. He first pushed upward with his arms, but his parents would not move. Then he changed his approach. He lay upon the earth, planted his shoulders and head firmly against his mother, and placed his feet against his father. Gathering all his strength, Tane slowly extended his legs. The bodies of heaven and earth began to move apart. Rangi cried out in pain, while Papa mourned the loss of her companion. Their voices filled the darkness as the space between them widened. Tane did not stop. He pushed Rangi higher and higher until the Sky Father stood far above the Earth Mother. For the first time, light entered the world. The gods could stand upright, plants could grow freely, and the great space between heaven and earth became the home of life. Although Rangi and Papa were separated, their love never ended. Maori tradition explains mist as the warm sighs of Papa rising from forests, mountains, and valleys toward her distant husband. Dew and rain are the tears of Rangi falling from the heavens as he mourns for the earth mother below. Another version presents the separation less as an act of rebellion and more as a willing sacrifice. In this account, Rangi himself tells his sons that they must raise him away from Papa so that light can enter the world and humanity may live. Tane asks how such an act can be accomplished, and Rangi explains that separation is necessary. If heaven remains pressed against earth, darkness will continue forever. By allowing himself to be raised, he will teach his children how the world must be ordered. The gods then work together to lift him. Tane carries Rangi upon his back, but cannot raise him high enough alone. Another divine being, Paya, joins the effort, strengthening himself through sacred chants and prayer. Together, they push Rangi upward and place enormous supports between heaven and earth. These pillars hold the sky in its new position. The gods fill the cracks, stabilize the heavens, and complete the structure of the world. As their work ends, daylight spreads across creation. Before leaving, Rangi says farewell to Papa. He promises that during certain seasons, he will weep for her, creating the dew that settles upon the earth. In winter, his cold sighs will descend as frost and ice. Papa replies that she too will continue to remember him. During the warmer seasons, her longing will rise as mist, drifting upward from the land toward the sky. Natural events thus become permanent signs of the love between the separated parents. The story also appears in the Chatham Islands, although in a shorter form. There, a divine figure known as the Heaven Proper raises the sky using 10 pillars placed one above another. The basic idea remains the same. The heavens were originally too low, and life could flourish only after they had been lifted. A similar tradition was preserved in the Cook Islands. According to this version, the sky once rested so close to the earth that it touched the broad leaves of plants. Human beings and gods were trapped inside the narrow space beneath it. The god Ru decided to raise the heavens. He called upon the gods of daylight and darkness to assist him, and together they pushed the sky upward while chanting sacred words. Once it reached a suitable height, Ru secured it firmly so that it could never fall again. The same god, sometimes called Ru, performs this task in the Society Islands. Related stories also appear in Samoa and other Central Pacific islands. In these traditions, however, the sky and earth are not always imagined as loving parents. The story is simpler. The sky was once dangerously low, and a powerful being lifted it to its present position. This theme is not limited to Polynesia. In the New Hebrides, a woman pounding food accidentally struck the low sky with her pestle. Angered by the obstruction, she commanded the heavens to rise, and they immediately moved upward. Almost identical stories appear in the Philippines and elsewhere in Indonesia. Myths of a low sky raised by a god, hero, or ordinary person also occur throughout Micronesia. The wide distribution of the theme suggests that Polynesian versions belong to a much older tradition stretching across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. The Maori story appears to be a particularly elaborate local development of this widespread myth. Instead of merely explaining why the sky is high, it transforms the event into an emotional family drama involving the love of Rangi and Papa, the suffering of their children, and the conflict between divine brothers. In some islands, the raising of the sky is also counted among the great adventures of the culture hero Maui. In Hawaii, the story is usually associated with Maui rather than with the creation of the universe. In New Zealand, however, it belongs almost entirely to the ancient history of the gods. Central Polynesia preserves both versions. Once Rangi had been lifted, Taini's work was still unfinished. The Sky Father stood high above the earth, but his body was empty and without decoration. Taina therefore began searching for ways to make him beautiful. He first brought red ornaments and placed them upon the heavens, but they did not create the magnificence he desired. Tain then traveled to sacred celestial regions and collected the stars. He placed them across the body of Rangi like shining fastenings upon a great cloak. During the day, their beauty could not be seen. When night arrived, however, the entire sky came alive with light, and the distant Sky Father appeared in all his splendor. The sun and moon were commonly described as children of Rangi. After the separation of heaven and earth, they were placed high in the sky, sometimes imagined as the great eyes through which the heavens looked down upon the world. Similar beliefs existed in Samoa and the Society Islands. In the Cook Islands, the sun and moon were called the eyes of Vatea, a god associated with light and the bright sky. Another Cook Islands story explains their different appearances through a conflict over divine parenthood. Vatea and another god both claim to be the father of Papa's first child. Unable to settle the dispute, they divided the child into two parts. Vatea took the upper half and threw it into the heavens, where it became the sun. The other god kept the lower portion on the earth for some time before eventually casting it upward as well. That second half became the moon. Because it had lost its blood and begun to decay before being raised into the sky, it shone with a weaker, paler light. The myth therefore explained why the moon appears dim beside the blazing sun. In other parts of Polynesia, the explanation was simpler. A great deity created the sun and moon and placed them in the heavens to illuminate the world. Yet even these brief traditions share the same central image. After the sky was raised, it had to be filled with light, movement, and beauty. The separation of Rangi and Papa was therefore not merely the end of darkness. It marked the true beginning of the visible world. Space opened between earth and sky, the stars appeared, the sun and moon began their journeys, and life finally gained the freedom to grow beneath the heavens. For the peoples of Polynesia, the sea was not simply part of the landscape. It surrounded every island, provided food, opened routes between distant communities, and could also bring sudden destruction. It is therefore unsurprising that Polynesian mythology developed several different explanations for how the ocean first came into existence. In many Central and Western Polynesian traditions, the sea was believed to have existed before the land. The earliest world consisted almost entirely of water, while the first islands later rose from the depths, were pulled upward by gods, or were dropped from the heavens. Other myths attempted to explain the physical origin of the ocean itself. In one tradition, the sea came from the sweat of Taroa as he struggled through the immense labor of creation. As the great god shaped the universe, the moisture pouring from his body gathered until it became the vast waters surrounding the world. A Samoan story offers a far more dramatic explanation. It tells of a primordial octopus whose ink sac suddenly burst. The dark liquid spread outward and became the first ocean. The myth transformed a familiar sea creature into a cosmic being whose body helped form the natural world. In the Marquesas, the ocean had an entirely different origin. There, it was connected with Atanua, the wife of the heavenly deity Atea. According to the story, Atanua suffered the loss of an unborn child, and the waters released from her body became the sea. The ocean was therefore linked not only with creation, but also with grief, birth, and divine suffering. Another Samoan fragment describes the sea as something that was originally hidden and sealed away. At some point, the barrier containing it was broken, and the imprisoned waters escaped across the earth, producing a catastrophic flood. This theme appears much more fully in Melanesian mythology, where the sea is often imagined as a dangerous force once kept inside a container, cave, or sacred enclosure. Its appearance in Samoa may preserve evidence of contact between Western Polynesia and neighboring Melanesian cultures. Polynesian myths also explain the origins of forests and trees. Maori tradition tells how Tane covered the body of the Earth Mother with vegetation after heaven, and Earth had been separated. Yet some versions add a curious detail to the story. When Tane first planted the trees, he placed them upside down. Their roots pointed toward the sky, while their branches extended into the ground. Looking upon his work, Tane decided that the trees appeared unnatural. He pulled them out, reversed them, and planted their roots deep within the earth. Their trunks and branches now stretched upward toward the heavens. Tane was satisfied with this arrangement, and trees have continued growing in this manner ever since. The idea that trees once grew upside down may be connected with traditions found farther west in Indonesia and Micronesia. In some of these stories, a gigantic tree hangs downward from the heavens, with its roots in the upper world and its branches reaching toward the earth. Human beings once traveled between heaven and the mortal world by climbing along it. Although Polynesian cultures were surrounded by the ocean, great flood stories were not usually as central to their mythology as creation tales or divine genealogies. Floods certainly appear, but they are often secondary episodes within larger stories, rather than the central event of an entire religious tradition. One group of flood myths is connected with Tahiti, a famous hero whose adventures frequently involve journeys to the heavens. In one account, Tahiti stamps upon the floor of the celestial world with such force that it cracks. The waters stored above the sky pour through the opening and cover the earth below. Another tradition says that the flood was caused by Tahiti's mother. Distressed by her son's actions, she began to weep. Her tears fell from the heavens in such enormous quantities that the land was submerged and humanity was swept away. In a third version, Tahiti deliberately calls upon the gods to send the flood. After enemies attempt to kill him, he and a companion climb to the summit of a mountain. From this place of safety, Tahiti requests a deluge that will destroy those responsible for the attack. The waters rise across the world while the two survivors remain beyond their reach. Hawaiian mythology preserves another powerful image of a world overwhelmed by water. This event is sometimes called the Sea of Kahinali and is connected with Pele, the goddess of fire and volcanic power. According to the story, Pele originally lived in a distant land to the southwest. When her husband abandoned her, she set out across the ocean to search for him. Her parents gave her control of the sea so that its waters could carry and protect her canoes. As Pele traveled, the ocean poured from her head and spread across the islands. The water rose so high that only the summits of the tallest mountains remained visible. Eventually, the sea withdrew and returned to its proper level, leaving the world uncovered once again. The story of Pele's flood is especially striking because it unites two opposing natural powers. Pele represents fire, lava, and volcanic destruction, yet she travels with the sea and temporarily commands its waters. The myth reflects the dramatic Hawaiian landscape where volcanic land and ocean constantly meet. A more detailed flood story comes from Raiatea in the Society Islands. It begins with a fisherman who casts his line into the sea. His hook catches what he believes to be an enormous fish, and he begins pulling with all his strength. In reality, the hook has become tangled in the hair of Ruahaku, a powerful sea god sleeping on the ocean floor. Awakened and injured, the deity becomes furious and threatens to kill the fisherman. Terrified, the man begs for mercy. Ruahaku finally agrees to spare him, but he refuses to overlook the insult completely. Instead, he announces that the rest of the world will suffer his revenge. Following the sea god's instructions, the fisherman takes refuge on a small islet. He brings a friend, a pig, a dog, and several chickens with him. Once they are safe, the ocean begins to rise. The waters continue climbing until the entire world disappears beneath the sea. Every other human being is destroyed. Only the fisherman, his companion, and the animals survive upon the isolated patch of land. After the destruction is complete, the flood gradually retreats. the survivors emerge to inhabit the world once more. Although parts of the story resemble later biblical traditions, its central characters, setting, and divine conflict belong firmly to the world of Polynesian mythology. Another flood narrative comes from Mangaia in the Cook Islands. This story describes a contest between Aokiu and the sea deity Ake, each determined to prove that he possessed greater power. Haki commands the ocean to rise against the island. Enormous waves crash over the land, destroying everything in their path. Aokiu responds by releasing endless rain from the sky. Caught between the sea below and the storm above, Mangaia is almost completely submerged. Only a tiny piece of land remains visible above the water. On this final refuge stands Rangi, remembered as the first king of Mangaia. Fearing that even this small fragment will soon disappear, he prays to Rongo for help. Rongo intervenes and orders the two rivals to end their struggle. The rain stops, the sea withdraws, and the island is saved. In this story, the flood does not punish humanity for wrongdoing. It is the accidental result of a contest between supernatural powers. Samoa preserves two flood traditions that are more closely connected to the creation of the world. In one version, a great deluge destroys every living being except a man named Pili and his wife. The couple survive by climbing onto a rock that remains above the waters. After the flood subsides, they become the ancestors of the new human population. Their story follows a familiar pattern in which a single family survives the destruction of the old world and begins humanity again. Another Samoan account names the survivors as Seve and Puniu. When the flood covers the earth, they remain alive by swimming through the endless waters. Tangaloa looks down from the heavens and sees their desperate condition. Taking pity on them, he sends two celestial beings carrying enormous hooks. The heavenly rescuers cast down their lines and pull the island of Samoa up from beneath the ocean. The newly raised land becomes a refuge for Seve and Puniu, allowing human life to continue. This version combines two major Polynesian themes: survival from a flood and the fishing or raising of land from the sea. The island itself becomes an instrument of divine rescue, drawn upward at the moment when humanity is about to disappear. Most of these traditions probably existed before European contact. Their gods, places, and basic narrative patterns fit closely with older Polynesian religious ideas. Floods are caused by divine anger, family conflict, supernatural rivalry, or the release of cosmic waters. Other accounts, however, show unmistakable signs of missionary influence. Flood stories recorded in New Zealand, Hawaii, and the Marquesas sometimes reproduce biblical details so closely that they cannot confidently be treated as purely indigenous traditions. In some cases, even the names of survivors, the construction of a vessel, the gathering of animals, and the sequence of destruction resemble the story of Noah. Such versions were probably created after Christian teachings entered the islands, combining foreign narratives with familiar Polynesian characters and settings. This does not mean that all Polynesian flood myths came from the Bible. Indigenous traditions of rising seas, divine floods, and world destruction clearly existed before missionaries arrived. Yet later, storytellers sometimes blended those older ideas with Christian narratives, making it difficult to separate the ancient material from more recent adaptations. Taken together, Polynesian traditions describe the ocean as both a source of life and an instrument of destruction. It could emerge from the body of a creator, the ink of a cosmic octopus, the suffering of a goddess, or a hidden reservoir suddenly released. The same waters that carried canoes and connected distant islands could also rise over mountains, erase entire populations, and return the world to its original condition. In Polynesian mythology, the sea was never an empty space between islands. It was a living cosmic power capable of creating the world, reshaping it, and beginning it again. Among all the legendary figures of Polynesia, few became as famous as Maui. Stories about his intelligence, courage, deception, and supernatural achievements were told across an enormous area of the Pacific. New Zealand, Hawaii, Tonga, the Cook Islands, the Society Islands, and many other island groups preserved their own versions of his adventures. These traditions did not always agree. The details of Maui's family, birth, personality, and accomplishments changed from one island to another. Yet, the same basic hero remained recognizable everywhere, a daring young demigod who challenged the limits imposed upon gods and humans. Maui is commonly described as the youngest of several brothers. Their number varies according to the tradition. Some stories speak of only 3 brothers, while others describe a family of 5 or 6. In Mangaya, however, Maui sometimes appears without any brothers at all. Like many heroes in world mythology, Maui is usually the youngest child, but also the cleverest. His older brothers are often portrayed as unimaginative, careless, or easily deceived. They follow established customs without questioning them, while Maui invents new methods and finds solutions that no one else has considered. One story says that the elder brothers hunted with smooth spears that could easily slip from their prey. Maui improved the weapon by adding a barb. In another tale, his brothers used eel traps with no proper entrance mechanism and could not understand why the eels escaped. Maui designed a trapdoor that allowed the creatures to enter but prevented them from leaving. These episodes present Maui not merely as a magician, but also as an inventor. He succeeds because he observes the world carefully, understands why others fail, and transforms ordinary tools through intelligence. The contrast between Maui and his foolish brothers resembles traditions found in Melanesia. Many Melanesian myths also describe 2 or more brothers in which one is intelligent and creative, while another is destructive, careless, or morally corrupt. In parts of the New Hebrides, a comparable hero was even known by the name Maui. In most Polynesian traditions, Maui's birth was not especially different from that of his brothers. Maori mythology, however, preserves a far more dramatic account. According to several New Zealand versions, Maui was born prematurely. His body was incomplete, and his mother believed that he could not survive. She wrapped the tiny child in part of her clothing or tied him into her hair before abandoning him. Some traditions say that she left him among the bushes. Others claim that she cast him into the ocean. Yet Maui did not die. Supernatural beings discovered the abandoned child and protected him. They carried him away, cared for his unfinished body, and raised him until he became strong. Some accounts place his childhood in the celestial world, where he lived among divine beings before returning to the land of humans. Maui's survival establishes the pattern of his entire life. From the moment of his birth, he overcomes death, rejection, and impossible circumstances. He belongs partly to the human world and partly to the supernatural realm, yet he is never completely accepted by either. During his youth in the upper world, Maui became involved in a conflict with a figure named Maru, sometimes described as one of his elder brothers. Maui ruined Maru's crops by sending destructive rain or snow upon them. Maru retaliated by covering Maui's fields with frost. The quarrel continued until Maui finally killed his rival. Even in these early adventures, Maui appears as both a creator and a troublemaker. His abilities can improve the world, but they can also bring conflict and destruction. After reaching adulthood, Maui decided to search for his human family. Eventually, he came upon his brothers while they were competing in a throwing game. Players cast reeds, fern stalks, or light spears toward a small mound so that the objects bounced and slid across the ground. The winner was the person whose throw traveled the greatest distance. Maui asked to participate. When his turn came, he launched his weapon and shouted his name. His brothers immediately rejected him, insisting that he had no right to call himself Maui or claim membership in their family. Rather than leaving, Maui demanded that their mother be brought before him. When she arrived, she also denied that he was her child and ordered him to go away. Maui then reminded her of the infant she had once abandoned. He described how she had wrapped the premature child and thrown him aside, believing him dead. He explained that supernatural ancestors had rescued him and raised him. Hearing this, his mother finally remembered what had happened. She recognized Maui as her lost youngest son, welcomed him into the family, and soon treated him as her favorite child. The story of the rejected child returning during a game has close parallels in Melanesian mythology. Similar tales describe an abandoned boy who later joins other children at play and is eventually identified by his parents. Within Polynesia, however, the complete episode appears mainly in New Zealand and Niue. Maui's life contains many adventures, but 3 became especially widespread throughout the Pacific. In the first, he pulls islands from the bottom of the ocean. In the second, he captures the sun and forces it to move more slowly. In the third, he searches for the secret of fire. The raising of land from the sea is one of the most famous episodes in Maori mythology. In one version, Maui's elder brothers were responsible for carrying food to an elderly female ancestor. Instead of completing their duty, they repeatedly ate the provisions themselves. Maui offered to go in their place. When he reached the old woman, he found that she was close to death and that part of her body had already become lifeless. Maui removed her lower jaw and fashioned it into a supernatural fishhook. He concealed the hook and returned home. His brothers regularly went fishing, but they refused to allow Maui into their canoe. They considered him troublesome and believed he would bring them no advantage. Maui therefore hid inside the vessel before they departed. Only when the canoe was far from shore did he reveal himself. His brothers became angry and threatened to return him to land, but eventually they allowed him to remain. He lowered the line into the deep ocean. Before long, something of unimaginable size seized the bait. Maui pulled with all his strength. The line tightened, the canoe shook, and the surface of the sea began to change. Slowly, an enormous body rose from the depths. It was not an ordinary fish, but a vast landmass that had been hidden beneath the ocean. After securing his catch, Maui warned his brothers not to damage it while he was away. If they waited, the new land might remain smooth, broad, and fertile. The brothers ignored his instructions. Overcome by greed, they began cutting the great fish into portions for themselves. As their blades entered its body, it struggled violently. The surface became broken and uneven. Mountains rose where the brothers had cut deeply, while valleys and ravines opened between them. In some versions, the movements of the wounded land destroyed the canoe and killed the disobedient brothers. The newly raised land was identified differently in different parts of Polynesia. Some traditions connected it with Tonga. Maori accounts identified it with New Zealand's North Island, which became known as Te Ika a Maui, the fish of Maui. The shape of the land was therefore understood as the body of Maui's enormous catch. Its mountains and valleys preserved the marks left by his brothers when they tried to divide it. Another version gives the magic hook an even darker origin. There, Maui kills his eldest son and makes the hook from the child's jawbone. The boy's ear becomes the bait. Maui struggles for 3 months to raise the land. During this immense labor, he is helped by Rupe, a supernatural pigeon who holds one end of the fishing line. This version emphasizes the terrible sacrifice sometimes required for acts of creation. The fishing story was especially detailed in New Zealand, but Hawaii preserved similarly elaborate accounts. Hawaiian traditions often explain why Maui's brothers disliked taking him with them. Maui was considered an unreliable fisherman, yet he repeatedly stole the fish caught by the others. Whenever one brother felt a catch pulling against his line, Maui claimed that their hooks had fastened onto the same fish. He would deliberately tangle his own line with his brothers. As the fish approached the canoe, Maui secretly moved his hook toward its head and lifted the animal aboard. The other line would suddenly become loose, making it appear that the brother had lost his catch. Maui would then display the fish and mock him for failing to pull carefully. Through tricks like this, he claimed the work of others and developed a reputation that made his brothers reluctant to include him. Eventually, however, they allowed Maui to join another expedition. This time, he brought his magical hook and baited it with a bird sacred to his mother, Haina. When the hook caught something beneath the ocean, the force was so great that Maui could not pull it alone. He called on his brothers to help. As they dragged upon the line, land began rising from the sea. Maui warned them that no one must look backward until the task was finished. If they obeyed, one enormous and continuous land would emerge. One brother lost control of his curiosity and turned around. At once, the magical line snapped. The rising land broke apart, producing a chain of separate islands instead of a single great continent. The myth provided a memorable explanation for the geography of Hawaii and other island groups. The islands were fragments of a larger land that Maui had almost succeeded in raising before human disobedience interrupted his work. In central Polynesia and Tonga, the story is usually shorter. Maui sometimes shares the achievement with Tangaroa or another powerful deity. In a few traditions, the fishing of islands is attributed entirely to someone else. The episode appears to have been less important in Samoa. There, Tangaloa, rather than Maui, is usually responsible for establishing the first land. The god casts a stone from the heavens into the primordial ocean so that his bird-like daughter will have a place to rest. The distribution of the story suggests that Maui's fishing adventure belonged to an old layer of Polynesian mythology. It remained highly developed in New Zealand and Hawaii, but became mixed with later creation traditions in the central and western islands. Related stories are also found beyond Polynesia. Myths about islands being pulled from the ocean appear in the New Hebrides, the Gilbert Islands, New Britain, and several smaller Pacific groups. These parallels may reflect ancient cultural connections formed during the migrations that populated Oceania. Maui's second great achievement was the capture of the sun. According to Hawaiian tradition, the sun once crossed the sky with extraordinary speed. Daylight ended almost as soon as it began, leaving people with too little time to complete their work. Maui's mother was especially frustrated. She produced sheets of tapa, the bark cloth used for clothing and other purposes, but the sun disappeared before the material could dry. Each day ended before she could finish her tasks. Seeing her difficulty, Maui decided that the sun must be slowed. Some versions say that he planned to break or remove its legs so that it could no longer race through the heavens. His mother prepared strong ropes for him. She also told him to visit his ancient grandmother, who possessed knowledge and magical objects that might help him. The old woman was blind and lived near the eastern path where the sun emerged from the underworld each morning. When Maui arrived, he found her cooking bananas. As she placed the food down, Maui secretly stole the bananas one by one. At first, she could not understand where they had gone. Unable to see the thief, she began sniffing the air until she recognized the scent of a human being. She angrily demanded that the intruder reveal himself. Maui announced that he was her grandson. Once she understood who he was, her anger disappeared. The grandmother listened to his plan and gave him a magical club. Armed with the weapon and carrying the ropes made by his mother, Maui traveled toward the place where the sun rose. He hid and waited through the darkness. As dawn approached, the sun began climbing from the lower world. Maui cast the first rope around one of its rays or legs and fastened it to a great tree. As more of the sun appeared, he threw additional loops, binding each part until the celestial being could no longer move freely. Once the sun was trapped, Maui attacked it with the magical club. He struck repeatedly, demanding that it stop racing across the sky. The sun struggled to escape but could not break the ropes. Fearing that Maui would destroy it, the sun begged for mercy. Maui agreed to release his captive only after receiving a promise. From that time onward, the sun would travel more slowly during part of the year, giving human beings enough daylight to work, fish, grow food, and dry their clothing. The sun accepted the condition, and Maui loosened the ropes. Its movement across the heavens became slower and more orderly. Through this victory, Maui transformed time itself. He did not create the sun, but he forced it to serve the needs of humanity. The story reflects one of the hero's most important roles. He challenges natural powers that appear permanent and brings them under control. Maui is neither a completely benevolent god nor an ordinary human hero. He steals, deceives, destroys, and disobeys. Yet his acts also make the world habitable. He raises land from the ocean, improves tools, lengthens the day, and later attempts to obtain fire and even overcome death. His victories establish the conditions under which human civilization can exist. That combination of generosity and mischief explains why Maui became one of the most enduring figures in Polynesian mythology. He is a creator without being the supreme creator, a divine being who often behaves like a reckless young man, and a cultural hero whose greatest achievements emerge from cleverness rather than obedience. The Maori version of Maui's confrontation with the sun follows the same broad pattern found in Hawaii. but it gives his brothers a much greater role in the adventure. Maui had noticed that the sun crossed the heavens far too quickly. The hours of daylight were so brief that people struggled to gather food, complete their work, and prepare for the coming night. He therefore proposed that the brothers capture the sun and force it to slow its journey. At first, they dismissed the plan as impossible. No living person could approach the sun without being consumed by its heat. Maui reminded them, however, that he had already accomplished deeds beyond ordinary human ability. He could transform himself into a bird and return to human form, and he had repeatedly succeeded where his brothers expected him to fail. Convinced by his confidence, the brothers began weaving powerful ropes. Maui carried his supernatural weapon, fashioned from the jawbone of one of his ancestors, while the others armed themselves and brought the completed cords. Together they traveled eastward toward the place where the sun emerged each morning. Before dawn, they arranged the ropes into enormous loops and prepared their ambush. Maui warned his brothers not to act too soon. They had to wait until the sun's head and shoulders had passed completely through the nooses. Once he gave the command, they were to pull with all their strength and hold the ropes regardless of the sun's screams. The horizon began to glow, and the sun rose like a mass of living fire. As soon as it moved into the trap, Maui shouted to his brothers. They tightened the ropes, and the sun suddenly found itself unable to continue its path. Maui rushed forward and struck the captive celestial being again and again with the ancestral jawbone. The sun cried out in pain, but Maui continued until its strength was broken. When the brothers finally released it, the sun could no longer travel with its former speed. Injured and exhausted, it moved slowly across the sky, giving humanity longer days in which to fish, cultivate the land, gather food, and complete the work necessary for survival. In some Maori accounts, the sun threatens that it will eventually take revenge upon Maui. Yet, it never regains the freedom it once possessed. From that moment onward, its daily path remains controlled by the hero's victory. Unlike the Hawaiian version, the New Zealand stories generally do not include Maui's encounter with a blind grandmother. That episode, however, was well known elsewhere in Polynesia. It was often connected not with Maui, but with another great hero, Tauhaki. Stories involving the theft of food from a blind person also appear in Melanesia, Micronesia, and Indonesia. The Hawaiian tradition may therefore have combined Maui's capture of the sun with an older and more widely distributed tale. The purpose of the adventure also changes from one island group to another. In most traditions, Maui slows the sun so that human beings can enjoy longer days. In the Society Islands, however, he attempts to draw it closer to the earth, so that its heat will warm the stones used for cooking. Samoan tradition attributes a shortened form of the exploit to a figure known as the Child of the Sun rather than to Maui. This demonstrates how famous mythological deeds could move from one hero to another as stories traveled between islands. The third of Maui's most celebrated achievements concerns the origin of fire. The fullest versions of this story come from New Zealand, where the search begins with a mystery inside Maui's own family. Maui and his brothers lived with their mother, yet every morning she disappeared before they awoke. None of them knew where she went or how she left the house. Determined to uncover the truth, Maui sealed every crack and opening in the dwelling. No light could enter at dawn, and his mother slept much later than usual. Maui remained awake and watched her carefully. When she finally rose, she approached a patch of grass or reeds, pulled it aside, and revealed a hidden opening in the ground. She descended through it and disappeared into the world below. Maui immediately transformed himself into a bird and followed her. Flying through the narrow passage, he entered the underworld and eventually revealed himself to his mother. When he asked for food, they discovered that the household fire had gone out. His mother prepared to send a servant to obtain another flame, but Maui offered to go himself. The guardian of fire was his ancient relative Mahuika, usually described in Maori tradition as an old and powerful woman. Maui traveled to her dwelling and respectfully asked her to give him fire. Mahuika removed one of her fingers, within which a living flame was concealed, and handed it to him. Maui carried it away, but once he was beyond her sight, he deliberately extinguished it in a stream. He returned and claimed that the flame had accidentally gone out. Mahuika gave him another fiery finger. Maui destroyed that one as well. Again and again he returned, and Mahuika continued giving him the fire contained within her fingers and toes. Maui's purpose was not simply to obtain a flame. He wanted to discover the true nature and source of fire. Through deception, he forced its guardian to reveal more and more of her supernatural power. Eventually, only one fragment of Mahuika's fire remained. Realizing that Maui had deceived her, she became furious. Instead of handing over the final flame, she hurled it toward him. Fire spread across the ground, leapt into the vegetation, and began consuming the entire world. Maui fled as the flames followed him. Forests burned, the earth became unbearably hot, and every living creature faced destruction. Unable to escape through his own power, Maui called upon the forces of rain, snow, and hail. Storm clouds gathered, and water poured down upon the burning world. The rain battled the flames until the great fire was finally extinguished. Maui survived, and the world escaped complete destruction. In some versions, this victory ends the story. Maui has defeated the Guardian of Fire and returned safely from the underworld. Other accounts explain that Mahuika, before losing her final power, cast the last sparks into certain trees. The fire entered their wood and remained hidden there. From that time onward, humans could produce flame by rubbing pieces of those trees together. Fire was no longer held exclusively by a supernatural being beneath the earth. Its essence had become part of the natural world and could be released through knowledge and skill. The story appears in several other Polynesian island groups, although its details vary considerably. These differences reveal how ancient mythological themes were reshaped as they moved across the Pacific. One element shared by nearly all the traditions is the belief that fire originally came from the underworld. Humanity did not create it independently. It had to be brought upward from a hidden realm controlled by supernatural powers. A similar idea appears in parts of Melanesia. Elsewhere in that region, however, fire is more commonly brought from a distant land by an animal or discovered by accident after several failed attempts. The entrance to the underworld also differs between versions. In some Maori, Samoan, and Niuean stories, it lies beneath a clump of grass or reeds. Pulling aside the vegetation reveals the passage below. Other accounts describe a solid rock or cliff that opens only after a sacred formula is spoken. Maui's mother approaches the barrier, recites the necessary words, and the stone separates to expose the road into the underworld. The idea of a magically opening rock appears in numerous myths from New Zealand, the Chatham Islands, and Tahiti. Related stories are also known from New Guinea and parts of Indonesia. In another Maori version, the entrance is concealed beneath one of the supporting posts of a house. When the post is removed, the path downward becomes visible. A similar method appears in traditions from Manihiki. The identity of the fire deity also changes across Polynesia. In New Zealand, Mahuika is generally female and is often presented as an elderly woman. In most other Polynesian versions, the keeper of fire is male. This difference may be important because stories from Melanesia frequently describe fire as belonging to an old woman. The Maori version may therefore preserve an ancient connection with traditions farther west. The Chatham Islands preserved the same basic image, while a modified version was known in the Marquesas. Comparable stories in Melanesia and Micronesia also describe fire being removed from the body of its supernatural owner. In many other Polynesian traditions, however, Maui receives only an ordinary firebrand. The bodily origin of fire is absent. The relationship between Maui and the fire deity also varies. In Maori mythology, their encounter ends in deception, anger, and a world-threatening blaze, but not usually in direct physical combat. Elsewhere, fighting becomes the central feature of the story. In Mangaia, Manihiki, the Marquesas, and parts of the Society Islands, Maui battles and kills the god of fire. The Manihiki tradition adds an unusual conclusion. After defeating the deity, Maui miraculously restores him to life, demonstrating that the hero possesses power not only over fire, but also over death. In Samoa and one Marquesan version, Maui wrestles with the fire god rather than killing him. During the struggle, he tears off one of the deity's arms. When Maui prepares to remove the other, the defeated god begs him to stop. Maui grants mercy and leaves him with one remaining arm. Similar episodes involving mutilated supernatural beings appear in both Micronesian and Melanesian traditions. The Great Fire extinguished by supernatural rain also has parallels in Melanesia. These shared elements suggest that the Polynesian fire myths did not develop in complete isolation. The strongest Melanesian connections appear in the traditions of New Zealand and the Chatham Islands, with additional traces in the Marquesas. These similarities may reflect ancient ideas carried eastward during the migrations that populated the Pacific. Yet each Polynesian culture transformed the story according to its own religious world. The identity of the Firekeeper changed, the entrance to the underworld shifted, and Maui's encounter could end through deception, combat, mutilation, or reconciliation. Behind these differences lies the same central meaning. Fire was once the secret possession of divine beings. It existed beyond ordinary human reach, hidden beneath the ground, or stored within a supernatural body. Maui crossed the boundary between worlds and forced that secret into the open. His reckless curiosity nearly destroyed creation, but it also gave humanity one of its most essential powers. With fire, people could cook food, remain warm, produce light, clear land, harden tools, and transform raw materials. Maui's theft therefore marks another decisive step in the movement from a primitive world toward human civilization. Like the capture of the sun, the Fire Quest shows Maui challenging a force of nature that had not yet been made useful to mankind. His methods are dangerous and dishonest, but the result permanently changes human life. Maui does not improve the world by patiently obeying the gods. He does so by testing their authority, entering forbidden places, and refusing to accept the limits placed before him. For this reason, he stands at the center of Polynesian heroic mythology, a figure whose curiosity creates disaster, whose courage restores order, and whose defiance gives humanity powers that once belonged only to the divine. Hawaii preserves no version of Maui's journey to the underworld in search of fire. Instead, Hawaiian tradition tells a completely different story in which the secret of flame belongs not to a subterranean deity, but to a group of clever birds living along the shore. One day, Maui and his three brothers were fishing when they noticed smoke rising from the land. A fire was burning near the beach, and Maui immediately wanted to discover who had made it. Yet, whenever the brothers approached, the mud hens responsible for the flames quickly extinguished them and scattered. The birds understood that Maui was watching them. Each time he and his brothers tried to surprise them, they counted the men in the canoe and refused to work if anyone was missing. Maui soon realized that simple concealment would not be enough. He therefore fashioned a human-shaped figure from rolled tapa cloth and placed it inside the canoe. From a distance, the object appeared to be another person. Maui hid on shore while his three brothers rowed out to sea with the dummy sitting among them. The birds looked toward the canoe and counted 4 figures. Believing that Maui and all his brothers had gone fishing, they gathered wood and began preparing another fire. Maui waited in hiding, but his impatience overcame him. Before the birds had fully completed their work, he rushed forward and seized one of them. Holding the creature tightly, he threatened to kill it unless it revealed how fire could be produced. The bird tried to deceive him by naming unsuitable kinds of wood. Maui followed each instruction, but no flame appeared. Realizing that the bird was lying, Maui tightened his grip and demanded the truth. Faced with death, the mud hen finally named the correct trees whose wood would create fire when rubbed together. Maui tested the method and succeeded. From that moment onward, human beings possessed the knowledge necessary to make fire whenever they needed it. The hero did not forgive the bird's deception. In revenge, he took a burning stick and rubbed it across the top of the creature's head. Hawaiian tradition explained the reddish mark carried by these birds as the permanent scar left by Maui. This version differs greatly from the fire stories of New Zealand and central Polynesia. Maui does not descend into a hidden world, confront an ancient fire deity, or cause a universal blaze. He learns the secret through observation, trickery, and the interrogation of an animal. Even so, the Hawaiian tale belongs to a broader Pacific tradition in which birds or animals possess fire before humanity. Similar myths appear in parts of Melanesia and Indonesia, where creatures travel to distant lands, steal burning material, or reveal the correct method of producing flame. Another achievement sometimes assigned to Maui is the raising of the sky. This episode has already appeared in creation traditions, where Tane, Ru, or another divine figure, separates heaven from earth. In several island groups, however, the deed was absorbed into the cycle of Maui's adventures. In New Zealand, Maui rarely plays any role in the lifting of the heavens. There, the separation of Rangi and Papa remains part of the ancient story of creation. In Hawaii, Samoa, and much of central Polynesia, Maui is more closely associated with the act. According to Hawaiian and Samoan traditions, the sky originally hung so low that people could scarcely stand upright. Its weight pressed down upon trees and mountains, leaving little room for life. Maui offered to raise it, but first asked a woman for water from her gourd. Once refreshed, he placed himself beneath the heavens and began to push. At first, he lifted the sky only as high as the tops of the trees. Resting briefly, he gathered his strength and forced it upward again until it reached the level of the mountains. Then, with one final and extraordinary effort, Maui thrust the heavens far above the earth. The sky remained there, creating the open world familiar to humanity. In these stories, the achievement is described as one of Maui's personal feats rather than a sacred conflict among the first gods. In Samoa, where Maui is sometimes known as Tahiti, the tale follows much the same pattern. Other Samoan accounts preserve an older structure. In them, Tangaloa commands another being to raise the sky, making the event part of the creation of the cosmos rather than a heroic adventure. Central Polynesia contains both forms. Some traditions credit the god Ru alone, while others claim that Maui completed the task with Ru's assistance. A recurring detail states that plants once supported the low heavens. Their leaves were flattened by the enormous pressure above them, and their present appearance preserves the mark of that ancient burden. The distribution of these stories suggests that the raising of the sky originally belonged to Polynesian creation mythology. As the Maui cycle expanded, the achievement was gradually transferred to the famous hero. New Zealand remained relatively isolated after the final major migrations, and there the old divine version survived. Central Polynesia preserved both the original and heroic forms, while Hawaii seems to have received only the Maui version. Just as Hawaii developed its own distinctive fire myth, New Zealand preserved an adventure of Maui almost entirely unknown elsewhere in Polynesia. This was his greatest and most dangerous undertaking, the attempt to abolish permanent death. After completing many extraordinary deeds, Maui returned to his parents. His father had heard of his victories, but warned him that one power remained beyond his control. Maui had captured the sun, raised land from the sea, and entered the world below. Yet his father believed that he would eventually be defeated by Hine Nui Tepo, the great woman of night and ruler of death. Far away, at the edge of the world, Maui could see the terrifying goddess. Her eyes flashed red near the horizon. Her teeth were sharp like volcanic glass, her hair spread like tangled seaweed, and her mouth resembled that of a great predatory fish. Maui refused to be intimidated. He reminded his father that the burning sun had once seemed unconquerable, yet he had captured and beaten it. If he had mastered the power that scorched the earth and consumed living things, he believed he could also overcome death. His father remained fearful. He confessed that when Maui was still a child, part of the sacred ritual performed over him had been omitted. This failure created an evil omen and made Maui vulnerable. Maui would not abandon his purpose. He declared that the question had to be settled. Would human beings continue dying forever, or could death itself be defeated? He gathered a company of small birds to accompany him. Robins, thrushes, fantails, and other creatures joined the expedition. Together they traveled at night to the dwelling of Hine Nui Tepo. They found the goddess asleep. Maui then explained his plan. To conquer death, he would enter the body of Hine Nui Tepo and pass completely through her. By reversing the path of birth, he hoped to destroy the power of mortality. If he emerged successfully from her mouth, she would die and human beings would live forever. Maui warned the birds that they must remain silent. The sight might appear strange or amusing, but they were forbidden to laugh until he had completed the passage. The birds were terrified. They warned Maui that Hinenui Te Po would certainly kill him if she awakened. Maui insisted that success depended entirely upon their silence. Once he was safely emerging from the goddess, they could laugh as loudly as they wished. He removed his clothing, tightened his weapon around his wrist, and approached the sleeping figure. His tattooed body shone in the darkness as he began the dangerous passage. The birds watched and struggled to control themselves. Their cheeks tightened as they suppressed their laughter. At last, the little fantail could bear the sight no longer. It burst into its familiar, cheerful cry. Hinenui Te Po awoke instantly. Realizing what Maui was attempting, she closed her body around him and killed the hero before he could escape. Maui had succeeded in entering the realm of death, but he failed to return. His defeat made mortality permanent for humanity. This story gives Maui's death a profound cosmic meaning. He does not perish in an ordinary battle or through the anger of a rival. He dies while trying to change the destiny of every human being. Some versions make the purpose of the journey even clearer. Maui had to pass through the world of night and emerge again, reproducing death and rebirth within his own body. Had he completed the cycle, human beings would have gained the power to return from death. The failure occurs at the final moment, when victory is already near. As in many Maui stories, a great transformation is lost because an instruction is broken. Earlier, a brother looked backward and caused the rising land to break into islands. Here, the laughter of a bird prevents the conquest of death. Maori tradition preserves other explanations for mortality as well. In one account, Maui debates the question with Hina, identified with the moon. Maui argues that human death should resemble the moon's disappearance. The moon seems to die, yet it returns and grows bright again. Humanity, he says, should also perish only briefly before rising to life once more. Hina rejects this proposal. She declares that human beings should die completely, return to the earth, and never rise again. Her decision becomes the law of the world. The moon continues to vanish and return, but human beings descend permanently into death. Stories of this kind appear in many cultures. Death is often explained as the result of a disagreement between supernatural beings. One figure desires immortality or resurrection for humanity, while another demands that death remain final. Sometimes the dispute is decided through force. In other traditions, a message is misunderstood, delivered too late, or deliberately altered. Human beings lose eternal life because of an error, an accident, or a divine command that cannot be reversed. The comparison with the moon is especially powerful. Each month, the moon fades, disappears, and returns. To early observers, it seemed to possess the renewal that humanity lacked. A related symbol found elsewhere is the snake, which sheds its skin and appears young again. Such animals become examples of the immortality that humans might once have received but somehow lost. Within Polynesia, Maui's debate with the moon is largely confined to New Zealand. A related Tahitian story exists, although there the moon supports renewal rather than opposing it, and Maui is not the central figure. Similar myths explaining death through a dispute, failed message, or misunderstanding occur widely in Melanesia and Indonesia. Their presence in Maori tradition may therefore reflect another old connection with cultures farther west. Maui's attempt to overcome Hinenui Te Po is far more elaborate than these simpler accounts. It combines the explanation of death with the hero's personal destiny and brings his adventures to a tragic conclusion. Throughout his life, Maui refuses to accept the world as he finds it. Days are too short, so he beats the sun. Land lies beneath the ocean, so he pulls it upward. Fire belongs to supernatural guardians, so he steals its secret. Death is the final limitation. Unlike the sun, sea, or fire, it cannot be permanently mastered. Maui's failure does not diminish his heroism. Instead, it defines the boundary between divine power and human fate. Even the greatest of the demigods can reshape the world only to a certain point. New Zealand mythology also credits Maui with several smaller victories over natural forces. One of these was the capture of the winds. According to some accounts, the winds once traveled freely and violently across the world. Maui pursued them and confined each inside a cave. One after another, he imprisoned the winds of different directions. Only the west wind escaped, remaining beyond his control. This explained why it continued to blow with unusual force. Samoan tradition preserves a related story in which the winds are gathered and placed inside a canoe or coconut shell. In the Chatham Islands, they are collected in a basket, although the deed is attributed to Tahiti rather than Maui. These tales once again portray natural forces as beings that can be trapped, carried, released, or restrained. Wind, fire, sunlight, and land are not passive parts of the environment. They possess movement, intention, and supernatural power. Maui's role is to confront these powers and make them less dangerous to humanity. Yet he never achieves complete control. One wind escapes, islands break apart, fire nearly destroys the earth, and death remains unconquered. This incompleteness is essential to his character. Maui improves the world without making it perfect. He is clever enough to challenge the gods, but reckless enough to endanger creation. He brings humanity great benefits, yet every success carries a cost. His final struggle with Hine Nui Tepo reveals the deepest meaning of the Maui cycle. Human beings may alter nature through courage, intelligence, and invention, but some limits cannot be crossed. The sun can be slowed, the sea can surrender land, and fire can be drawn from wood. Death alone stands beyond the reach of even the greatest hero. Two further stories complete the major New Zealand cycle of Maui. Neither is as widely known as his capture of the sun or his search for fire, yet both reveal the same combination of anger, magical power, and transformation that defines so many of his adventures. In the first tale, Maui turns his brother-in-law into a dog. The reason for Maui's anger differs from one account to another. In some versions, the man consumes bait that Maui had carefully prepared for fishing. In others, he insults the hero, interferes with his plans, or behaves in a way that Maui considers intolerable. The method of transformation also changes. One story says that Maui offers to clean or arrange his brother-in-law's hair. While pretending to perform an ordinary act of grooming, he gradually reshapes the man's head and body until he takes on the appearance of a dog. Another version describes the victim falling asleep while Maui is nearby. Taking advantage of his helpless condition, Maui presses, stretches, and molds the sleeping man's limbs into canine form. When he awakens, the transformation is complete. In a third account, Maui asks his brother-in-law to lie on the ground and serve as a support over which a canoe can be dragged. The unsuspecting man agrees. As the heavy vessel passes across his body, Maui's magic changes him into the first dog. The story is striking because the dog does not emerge through ordinary creation or birth. It comes from a human being whose body has been violently reshaped. This kind of transformation reflects a broader Polynesian belief that the boundaries between humans, animals, and divine beings were not always permanent. A person might become a bird, shark, lizard, eel, or dog through magic, punishment, ancestry, or desire. Such stories explain the origins of animals, while also warning that supernatural power could permanently alter anyone who provoked a dangerous figure. As far as the surviving traditions indicate, Maui's transformation of his brother-in-law into a dog was unique to New Zealand. His next adventure, however, belongs to a much wider network of myths extending across central Polynesia. This story concerns Tuna, the great eel. In the Maori version, Tuna is connected with Maui's wife. One day, she goes to a stream to collect water. As she stands near the bank, an enormous eel rises from the water, strikes her with its tail, and drags or knocks her into the stream. When Maui learns what has happened, he becomes furious. He decides not merely to drive the creature away, but to destroy it. Maui places 2 logs across the water, creating a narrow crossing that Tuna will be forced to use. He then hides nearby and waits. When the eel approaches and begins moving across the logs, Maui attacks. He kills Tuna and cuts apart the enormous body. From the remains of the creature, new forms of life appear. Different versions claim that plants, trees, fish, sea creatures, and terrifying beings of the deep emerged from Tuna's head, flesh, or other parts. Once again, destruction becomes creation. The death of a supernatural being does not end life, but releases it into many new forms. Tuna's body becomes part of the natural world, and his remains continue to exist in plants, animals, and the sea. Closely related stories appear in Samoa, Tahiti, Mangaia, and the Union Islands. In these tropical versions, the tale is usually told not simply to explain the death of an eel, but to reveal the origin of the coconut tree. One of the fullest accounts comes from Mangaia. A young woman named Ina regularly bathed in a quiet pool. One day, a great eel approached and touched her. The same thing happened repeatedly, and the mysterious creature gradually became familiar to her. Eventually, the eel abandoned its animal appearance and revealed itself as a handsome young man named Tuna. Ina accepted him as her lover. From then onward, Tuna visited her in human form. Whenever he departed, however, he returned to the shape of an eel and disappeared into the water. Their relationship continued until Tuna announced that he would soon have to leave forever. Before departing, he gave Ina precise instructions. On the following day, he said, he would return in eel form, carried by an immense flood. Ina must be ready. When he reached her, she was to cut off his head and bury it in the ground. The next day, the water rose as Tuna had predicted. The great eel appeared, and Ina followed his instructions. She removed his head, buried it, and returned to the place each day. At first, nothing happened. The earth remained undisturbed, and there was no sign that Tuna's promise would be fulfilled. After some time, however, a small green shoot emerged from the burial place. It continued growing until it became a tall and graceful tree. The tree eventually produced an unfamiliar fruit. These were the first coconuts. When the outer husk was removed, 3 marks could be seen upon the shell. To the people who told the story, these resembled 2 eyes and a mouth. They were understood as the surviving face of Tuna, still looking toward Ina from every coconut. The myth gives emotional meaning to one of the most important plants in tropical Polynesia. The coconut tree provided water, food, oil, fiber, wood, fuel, containers, and building material. Nearly every part of it could be used. By linking the tree to the body of a supernatural lover, the story transformed an essential resource into a sacred gift. Every coconut became both food and remembrance. This form of the story appears only where coconut palms can grow. In New Zealand, the climate could not support the tree, and the myth took on a different form. Tuna's death still produced elements of nature, but not the coconut. The absence of a comparable Hawaiian version is more difficult to explain. Coconuts were abundant in Hawaii, yet the story of Tuna's buried head seems not to have become an important part of Hawaiian mythology. 2 themes within the myth deserve particular attention. The first is the animal lover, who later reveals a human form. This pattern, sometimes compared with stories of a hidden or enchanted bridegroom, appears frequently in Melanesia and Indonesia. A woman meets an animal, discovers that it is secretly a man or divine being, and enters into a relationship with it. The union may end happily, tragically, or through the breaking of a prohibition. Within Polynesia, this motif is especially common in the central and western islands, but less prominent elsewhere. The second theme is the growth of a coconut tree from a buried head. This story appears widely across Melanesia and also in parts of Indonesia. Its origin is not difficult to understand. A coconut resembles a human head, particularly after the outer husk has been removed. Its 3 natural marks can easily be imagined as eyes and a mouth. Yet the widespread distribution of the tale suggests more than independent observation. As people migrated through the Pacific, they likely carried both the coconut and the stories that explained its sacred origin. With the conclusion of Maui's cycle, Polynesian mythology does not become less rich. Beyond the famous demigod lies an enormous body of stories concerning divine warriors, celestial women, monsters, ancestors, magical journeys, and the movement between earth and heaven. Among the Maori, many of these traditions gather around a hero named Tauhaki and, in later generations, his descendant Rata. The stories are less uniform than those of Maui. Their order changes considerably, and characters sometimes exchange roles from one version to another. Nevertheless, the central episodes form one of the most important heroic cycles in New Zealand mythology. The tale begins with Waitiri, also called Watitiri, a powerful woman of the sky whose name is associated with thunder. Waitiri was beautiful and divine, but she was also a cannibal. From her home in the heavens, she heard stories of a warrior on earth named Kai Tangata, whose name could be understood as Eater of Men. Believing that she had discovered a man who shared her appetite for human flesh, Waitiri decided to descend and marry him. To demonstrate her affection, she killed one of her servants and carried the fresh heart to Kai Tangata as a gift. She expected him to accept it eagerly. Instead, he reacted with horror. He explained that his name did not mean that he literally ate people. It referred to his courage and success in battle. Waitiri was disappointed, but she married him nevertheless. They lived together and had several children, one of whom was Hema, who would later become the father of Tauhaki. Although Kai Tangata rejected cannibalism, Waitiri did not abandon her hunger. She continued killing and eating people in secret. Eventually, she consumed some of her husband's own relatives without realizing who they were. Kai Tangata later found their bones and used them to make fishing hooks. Fish were caught with these hooks and served to Waitiri. When she ate them, a supernatural punishment fell upon her, and she became blind. The blindness marked both her crime and her separation from the world around her. The powerful sky goddess who had once descended with confidence was now forced to depend upon others. Tension grew between Waitiri and her husband. After Kai Tangata made remarks that offended her, she decided to leave him and return to the heavens. Before departing, she warned their son Hema not to attempt the journey after her. The path to the upper world was too dangerous for him. She added, however, that Hema's children might one day possess enough power to reach her. A cloud descended from the sky and surrounded Waitiri. Within it, she rose from the earth and disappeared into her former home above. In some versions, Waitiri delivers her warning not directly to Hema, but to another wife of Kai Tangata. The message is later repeated to the grieving family. Hema grew to adulthood, married, and became the father of 2 sons, Tauhaki and Karihi. Disaster soon entered the family. Hema's wife was captured by hostile supernatural beings. Determined to rescue her, Hema followed them into their distant territory. He failed. The creatures defeated and killed him, leaving Tauhaki and Karihi without their father. Tauhaki became famous for both his beauty and his strength. Women admired him, and this attracted the jealousy of his male relatives. One day, while Tauhaki was bathing, his cousins attacked him without warning. They beat him severely and abandoned him, believing that he was dead. His wife found the injured hero and cared for him. Through her attention, he slowly recovered. Once his strength returned, Tauhaki sought revenge. He prayed to the gods, asking them to punish those who had tried to murder him. In response, a devastating flood descended upon the world. The waters overwhelmed his enemies and destroyed them. The episode establishes Tauhaki as a hero with direct access to divine power. Unlike Maui, who usually relies on trickery or physical courage, Tauhaki often succeeds through sacred knowledge, ritual language, and communication with the heavens. After dealing with his attackers, Tauhaki turned toward a more personal mission. He resolved to find and rescue his captive mother. The journey carried him across great distances into the land of the beings who held her. When he finally reached their settlement, he discovered that she was forced to sleep outside the main house. Each morning, she had to awaken her captors at dawn. Tauhaki revealed himself to her, and together they devised a plan. He entered the house secretly and waited until every enemy had gone inside and fallen asleep. Then he and his mother blocked all the openings through which daylight could enter. They sealed the cracks, doors, and spaces in the walls. Dawn came, but the interior of the house remained completely dark. The captors continued sleeping long after sunrise, unaware that the day had begun. When the sun was high and its light strongest, Tauhaki suddenly opened the house. The brilliant glare rushed inside. The creatures, accustomed to darkness, were blinded and confused. Before they could defend themselves, Tauhaki attacked and killed them. His mother was freed, and another wrong against his family was avenged. The hero's work, however, was not yet complete. His father Hema remained missing, and Tauhaki wanted to discover what had become of him. Together with his brother Karihi, he set out across the sea. After a long voyage, the brothers reached a distant land. There they encountered an ancient blind woman counting yams, baskets, or parcels of food. The woman was their grandmother, Waitiri. As she counted, Tauhaki crept close and quietly removed one item. Waitiri began again, discovered that the number had changed, and counted the remaining food once more. Tauhaki took another. He repeated the trick until Waitiri realized that an unseen presence was stealing from her. She sniffed the air, searching for the scent of a human being. Her old cannibal hunger had not completely disappeared, and she hoped to seize whoever had approached. At last, Tauhaki revealed his identity. He told her that he was the son of Hema, and therefore her grandson. Waitiri's hostility ended. Tauhaki then restored her sight. Some accounts say that he mixed his saliva with clay and rubbed the substance over her eyes. Others claim that he struck or touched them with his hand. Her vision returned, and Waitiri was finally able to see the descendant who had crossed the world in search of his family. The meeting repeats an episode found in several Maui traditions where a young hero steals food from a blind female relative before revealing his identity. In the Tauhaki cycle, however, the encounter is more than a trick. Waitiri represents the divine ancestry of the hero and the connection between his human family and the sky. By finding her and restoring her sight, Tauhaki begins the process of reclaiming the supernatural inheritance promised to Hima's children. His journey is therefore not only a search for his father, it is also a movement upward through his own ancestry, drawing him closer to the celestial world from which Waitiri once descended. From his grandmother Waitiri, Tauhaki finally learned how the upper world could be reached. The path was not a road, ladder, or mountain, but a delicate spider's web suspended from the heavens and descending all the way to the earth. Tauhaki and his brother Karihi prepared to climb it. Karihi attempted the ascent first, but the violent winds of the upper air struck him before he had traveled far. Unable to hold on, he was torn from the web and fell to his death. Tauhaki continued alone. The higher he climbed, the more distant the mortal world became. At last, he crossed the boundary between earth and sky and entered the celestial realm. There he met an ancient woman and asked where the remains of his father Hima could be found. She directed him to a house in which the bones had been preserved. Curiously, some versions say little about what Tauhaki did after discovering them. His attention turned instead toward an even greater purpose. He wished to climb beyond the ordinary sky world and reach the highest heaven where the most powerful sacred knowledge was kept. Tauhaki ascended through the celestial regions until he reached the dwelling of a supreme divine figure. There, he learned mighty prayers, incantations, and ritual formulas unknown to human beings. He eventually carried this knowledge back to the mortal world. Through him, people gained access to charms that could protect, heal, command supernatural powers, and give authority to religious ceremonies. This aspect of the story presents Tauhaki as more than a warrior. He becomes a mediator between heaven and humanity. His journey brings back spiritual knowledge in the same way that Maui's adventures brought fire, land, and longer daylight. Other traditions give a different ending. In them, Tauhaki remains in the sky and becomes a divine being associated with lightning. His brilliance in the heavens is understood as the visible sign of his continuing presence. Some versions also explain that his journey began not with the search for his father, but with the loss of his wife. According to this form of the tale, a beautiful woman from the upper world became fascinated with Tauhaki while he still lived on Earth. She descended secretly at night to visit him, returning to the sky before morning. Eventually, she chose to remain openly as his wife. They lived together, and she gave birth to a daughter. Their happiness did not last. After a quarrel, the Sky Woman decided to leave. She returned to her celestial home and took the child with her. Tauhaki was overwhelmed by grief. Unable to accept their disappearance, he resolved to follow them into the heavens. His search brought him once again to the blind old woman, and from her he learned the route upward. He climbed the spider's web and reached the sky world. To avoid recognition, Tauhaki disguised himself as an old and weak man. He encountered a group of people constructing a canoe, but instead of welcoming him, they forced him to carry their axes and tools. Tauhaki quietly endured the humiliation. Later, when no one was watching, he returned to the unfinished vessel and completed it alone with supernatural speed. When the workers came back, they were astonished to find the canoe finished. Tauhaki then abandoned his disguise, revealed his true identity, and openly began searching for his wife. He eventually found her and was reunited with his family. Rather than returning to Earth, he remained in the heavens. Whatever the exact circumstances of Tauhaki's marriage, the union produced a son named Wahiaroa. Wahiaroa grew to adulthood and married. When his wife became pregnant, she developed a desire for a rare food found only in a distant eastern land. Determined to satisfy her request, Wahiaroa set out on the dangerous journey. He reached the far country, but was captured by a monstrous cannibal named Matuku and killed. Back at home, his wife gave birth to a son. The child was named Rata. Rata grew up without knowing his father. When he was old enough to ask about him, his mother revealed that Wahiaroa had been murdered in a remote land by a cannibal giant. The young man immediately decided that he would seek revenge. To reach the land of Matuku, however, he first needed a great ocean-going canoe. Rata entered the forest and selected a magnificent tree. Without performing any ceremony, he cut it down and returned home, intending to continue the work the following morning. When he came back, the tree was standing upright in its original place. Its trunk was whole, its branches were green, and there was no sign that an axe had ever touched it. Confused, Rata felled the tree a second time. Once again, he left the forest at night. The next morning, the tree had returned to life. Rata now understood that some hidden power was undoing his labor. He cut the tree down for a third time but did not leave. Instead, he concealed himself nearby and waited. As darkness gathered, he heard voices singing among the trees. Small forest beings emerged, sometimes described as spirits and sometimes appearing in the form of birds. At their command, every chip, splinter, and fragment of bark began moving. The pieces flew back toward the stump. The trunk rose from the ground, the cut surfaces joined together, and the tree slowly became complete again. Rata stepped from hiding and demanded that the spirits stop. They explained that he had violated the sacred order of the forest. The tree belonged to Tane, lord of trees and birds, and Rata had taken it without asking permission. He had performed no sacrifice, spoken no prayer, and offered no respect to the powers inhabiting the woodland. The restoration of the tree was therefore not intended merely to frustrate him. It was a correction of his failure to observe the proper relationship between humans and nature. Rata acknowledged his mistake. The forest spirits took pity on him. They told him to return home and promised that they would complete his canoe during the night. When morning came, a beautifully constructed vessel stood ready. The tree had been felled, shaped, hollowed, and transformed into a seaworthy canoe by supernatural labor. The story expresses an important principle of Maori thought. Nature could be used, but it could not be treated as lifeless property. Trees possessed sacred associations, and important work required ritual recognition of the divine beings who governed them. With the canoe complete, Rata gathered companions and launched his expedition. Their purpose was to find the cannibals responsible for his father's death and recover Wahiaroa's remains. After a long voyage, they reached an island inhabited by one of the giants. The creature was so enormous that it attempted to swallow the entire company at once. Rata responded with magic, multiplying the apparent number of his followers until they covered the shore. No matter how wide the giant opened its mouth, it could not consume them all. The monster then tried another plan. It invited the travelers into its house and encouraged them to sit upon woven mats. Beneath the coverings were concealed pits and traps intended to capture them. Rata and his companions recognized the danger and avoided the seats. The giant offered them food, but they refused to eat. When they asked for water, the creature went away to search for it and returned cold, tired, and unsuspecting. Rata saw his opportunity. He offered the giant something warm and strengthening, As the monster opened its enormous mouth, Rata threw in stones heated red-hot in the fire. The burning rocks tore through the creature from within. Its body burst apart, and it died. A more dangerous enemy still remained. This was Matuku, the great cannibal who had killed Wahiaroa. Matuku lived inside an immense underground cavern. In some accounts, he possessed wings, making him even more difficult to capture. Rata and his followers spread powerful nooses around the entrance to the cave. They then placed tempting food outside, hoping to draw the giant into the open. Matuku smelled the provisions and emerged to seize them. The moment he crossed the hidden ropes, the loops tightened around his body. The giant struggled violently. He pulled against the cords, beat his wings, and nearly escaped. During the fight, however, his wings were broken. Rata's companions tightened the nooses until Matuku was overcome and killed. Inside the cave, Rata found the bones of his father. He gathered them with care, carried them back to the canoe, and began the journey home. His revenge was complete. More importantly, Wahiaroa's remains had been rescued from the land of his enemies and restored to his family. The complete sequence involving Waitiri, Hema, Tauhaki, Wahiaroa, and Rata survives most fully in New Zealand. Other Polynesian traditions preserve individual characters and episodes, but nowhere else does the entire cycle appear in precisely the same arrangement. The best way to understand its wider connections is therefore to examine its separate themes. Cannibalism is unusually prominent throughout the New Zealand versions. Waitiri eats human beings, Hema is killed by monstrous enemies, Wahiaroa dies at the hands of Matuku, and Rata encounters giants who attempt to swallow whole companies of men. Waitiri herself was sometimes imagined descending from the heavens to capture people with a net. She carried them upward as food. A similar image appears in Mangaya, where a cannibal from the sky lowers a basket to the earth and uses it to collect human victims. On Rotuma, an island west of Samoa, whose culture combines Polynesian and Melanesian elements, divine cannibals were said to descend from the upper world as though going fishing. Instead of fish, they caught human beings and carried them back into the sky. Outside New Zealand, Tahiti preserves the clearest parallel to the cannibal ancestress, although the narrative is quite different. In the Tahitian story, a goddess named Haumea married Ro'o Nui, a being who had risen from the underworld. They had a child named Tuture. After a quarrel, Ro'o Nui abandoned his wife and returned below the earth. Haumea reacted with rage and became a cannibal. Tutur feared that his own mother would eventually eat him. He therefore constructed a magical canoe so that he could escape. To gain time, he secretly pierced holes in the gourds used for carrying water. He then asked Haumea to fetch water from a distant spring. Each time she returned, the damaged vessels were empty. She repeated the journey several times before discovering that she had been deceived. By then, Tutur had launched his canoe and fled. Haumea pursued him through the sea, swimming with supernatural speed. She soon caught up and opened her mouth wide enough to swallow both Tutur and his vessel. Tutur threw heated stones directly into her throat. The burning rocks destroyed her from within, just as Rata later killed the cannibal giant who tried to consume him. Yet Haumea did not remain dead. Her body drifted ashore, came back to life, and took the name Nona or Rona. She continued preying upon human beings and eventually bore a daughter. When the daughter grew older, she took a lover who was one of the last surviving men in the region. Most of the population had already been eaten by her mother. The young man hid inside a cave that could be opened only by speaking a secret formula. Nona eventually learned the words. Pretending to be her daughter, she approached the cave, recited the charm, and entered. She then killed and ate the concealed lover. Furious that her daughter had tried to preserve a victim from her, Nona decided to kill her as well. The daughter placed a log in her bed to create the appearance that she was sleeping and escaped during the night. Nona discovered the trick and followed her. The fleeing woman reached the home of an old man and begged him for protection. He agreed and succeeded in killing the cannibal goddess. He later married the daughter. Among their descendants was Hema, who became the father of the Tahitian form of Tauhaki. This tradition differs greatly from the Maori account, but both place a cannibalistic woman near the beginning of Tauhaki's ancestry. Cannibal monsters are relatively uncommon in much of Polynesian mythology. They are far more frequent in Melanesian and Indonesian stories. In those regions, they often dwell in trees, caves, or isolated places and may resemble vampire-like spirits that feed upon human life. Their prominence in the Maori Tauhaki cycle may reflect the survival of very old Western Pacific influences. Another significant feature is the Sky Woman who descends to Earth, marries a mortal man, and later returns to her celestial home. The story does not contain every element of the widespread Swan Maiden tradition, in which a man steals the feathers or magical clothing of a supernatural woman and prevents her from returning to the sky. Nevertheless, the resemblance is clear. Such stories are common in Indonesia and appear in parts of Melanesia, particularly the New Hebrides and Western New Guinea. They are much less prominent in the rest of Polynesia. Tauhaki's skywife may therefore represent a distant Polynesian form of this much broader mythological pattern. The early events of the Maori story, including the betrayal of Tauhaki and the rescue of his mother, are not widely preserved elsewhere, yet the principal names remained known. Hema and his two sons appear in Hawaiian and Tahitian genealogies, although their adventures are different. The attempted murder of Tauhaki survives in altered form in the Cook Islands and Society Islands, but seems to have disappeared from Hawaiian tradition. Tahiti replaces the rescue of the captive mother with a series of battles against supernatural monsters. In this version, Arihi prepares an expedition with several companions to destroy dangerous beings that kill humans. Tawhai, the Tahitian form of Tauhaki, wishes to accompany them. Arihi and the others refuse. Tawhai nevertheless obtains a powerful charm, mounts a giant shark, and rides across the ocean. He reaches their destination before the canoe. When Arihi's company finally arrives, they are astonished to discover him already waiting. The first threat is a magical kava plant whose branches stab and kill anyone who comes near. Several men die before Tawhai confronts and destroys it. He then defeats a man-eating monster and completes the dangerous task that the others had undertaken. Once again, Tawhai returns by shark and reaches home ahead of the expedition. When Arihi and his companions arrive, Tawhai takes revenge on those who had refused him. He persuades all except Arihi to climb into trees. Through magic, he causes the trees to grow high and bend outward over the sea. He then strikes them, throwing the men into the water. As they fall, they are transformed into porpoises. The story combines several familiar Polynesian themes: the excluded younger hero, magical ocean travel, the defeat of monsters, and the transformation of humans into animals. The encounter with the blind grandmother also appears in Mangaya and Tahiti. These versions resemble both the Tauhaki story and the Hawaiian account of Maui visiting a blind ancestress. In a Tuamotuan tradition, the blind woman is named Kui. She attempts to capture Tauhaki and Arihi with a net, reflecting the customary weapon of a cannibal ogress. When that fails, she tries other methods. Finally, she swings a giant fishhook and catches Arihi. In another Tahitian version, and in Mangaya, the hook is her principal weapon from the beginning. Her first cast catches only a log, but later she captures a human victim. She releases him when she discovers that he is her grandson. In Mangaya, this entire adventure belongs not to Tauhaki, but to Tane. Tane agrees to accompany a chief named Ako, who is traveling to court a beautiful woman. During the journey, Tane himself falls in love with her and tries unsuccessfully to win her away from his companion. Ako retaliates by secretly puncturing Tane's canoe. As the damaged vessel begins to sink, Tane leaps into a tree growing near the shore. He makes it sway farther and farther until its top bends across the ocean toward a distant land. Using the tree like a living bridge, he throws himself safely across the sea. There he encounters Koi the Blind, steals her food, reveals himself, and restores her sight. The bending tree episode appears again later. Tane climbs a tall coconut palm and causes it to arch across the ocean until its crown hangs above his homeland. He shakes the tree, sending coconuts down to his people, and then allows the trunk to spring back to its original place. A similar moving tree motif appears in the Tahitian stories of Tauhaki. It is otherwise rare in Polynesia, but has parallels in Melanesia and Indonesia. This pattern presents trees not as fixed objects, but as supernatural paths capable of carrying heroes across vast distances. It resembles the spider's web, rope, and vine used to reach the heavens. It remains impossible to determine whether the blind grandmother episode originally belonged to Tauhaki and was later absorbed into Maui's adventures, or whether the reverse occurred. Oral traditions frequently transferred successful scenes from one famous hero to another. In New Zealand, Tauhaki's search for Hema leads upward into the sky. The route is most often a spider's web, although other versions replace it with a cord or climbing vine lowered by his celestial ancestress. Elsewhere, the ascent may become an ordinary voyage to a remote and supernatural country. The Rarotongan version describes several dangers along the way. The most remarkable is a land inhabited by fierce and beautiful women who attempt to marry every man who arrives. A traveler who accepts their invitation risks never returning. The episode resembles Melanesian traditions of an island inhabited entirely by alluring women, where a visitor may be overwhelmed or even die from excessive desire. Although the details differ, the theme belongs to a wider imagination of distant islands as places of temptation and danger. Beyond the known ocean lay lands where ordinary social rules no longer applied, supernatural women ruled, and a careless voyager might lose both his freedom and his life. Across these stories, Tauhaki is continually moving between boundaries. He travels from Earth to heaven, from human society into monstrous lands, and from ordinary identity into disguise. His descendants repeat the pattern. Wahiaroa journeys east and is killed, while Rata crosses the sea to reclaim his father's bones. Together, their adventures form a mythology of separation and return. Family members are lost to the sky, the underworld, cannibals, or distant islands, and each new generation must cross impossible distances to restore what has been taken. Tauhaki brings sacred knowledge back from heaven. Rata returns with the remains of his father. Their victories are not acts of creation on the scale of Maui's achievements, but they preserve ancestry, ritual power, and the bonds connecting the living with the dead. The story of Tauhaki's ascent to the heavens appears in many different forms across the Pacific, making it one of the most fascinating myths in Polynesian tradition. Although the New Zealand version describes Tauhaki climbing to the upper world by ascending a spider's web, this detail is surprisingly rare elsewhere. Hawaii preserves a similar image, while stories from the New Hebrides and the Caroline Islands also mention spiderwebs connecting earth and sky. Other cultures prefer different paths to the heavens. In parts of Melanesia and Indonesia, heroes climbed ropes, while Indonesian traditions sometimes describe a giant vine stretching toward the sky. Hawaiian tradition presents a very different journey. There, Tauhaki, known as Kahai, and his brother Karihi travel upward by following a brilliant rainbow. Their goal is to find the gods Tane and Tangaloa and discover what became of their missing father, Hema. Unlike the New Zealand account, the Hawaiian version survives only as a fragment, leading some scholars to believe it was introduced from islands farther south, such as Tahiti or the Marquesas. Interestingly, the rainbow as a bridge between worlds is almost unknown elsewhere in Polynesia, but appears in several Indonesian traditions, suggesting that this striking image may have much older roots. Across nearly every version of the legend, one detail remains remarkably consistent. Tauhaki's father falls into the hands of cannibals. These enemies are frequently described as dark-skinned, and some historians have suggested that this imagery may preserve distant memories of encounters between the ancestors of the Polynesians and Melanesian peoples during their migrations across the Pacific. Whether historical memory or symbolic storytelling, the recurring description has intrigued researchers for generations. The reason for Tauhaki's journey also changes depending on where the story is told. In New Zealand, although he eventually discovers his father's remains, he quickly shifts his attention toward reaching the highest heaven in search of sacred knowledge and powerful incantations for humanity. Elsewhere, the rescue itself becomes the central focus. In the Cook Islands, Tauhaki arrives just in time to save his father, moments before he is executed and roasted by his captors. Tahitian storytellers offer an even more dramatic version. Tauhaki finds his father humiliated and buried beneath filth. After rescuing him, the hero surrounds the enemy's house with nets, traps everyone inside, sets the building ablaze, and escapes with his father unharmed. Hawaiian tradition takes a darker turn, claiming that Tauhaki dies during his quest, leaving the task of vengeance to his grandson, Rata. The next generation continues the cycle of heroic adventures through the story of Rata. Variations of this legend appear throughout Hawaii, Tahiti, and the Cook Islands, although the details differ from island to island. In one Tahitian version, Rata's parents disappear while fishing after being attacked by a monstrous bird. His father is swallowed alive, while his mother is carried away to a distant land. Raised without knowing the truth about his family, Rata grows up believing himself an ordinary child until, after defeating other children in a game, they mock him as an orphan with unknown parents. Confused and angry, he confronts the elderly guardian Ui, who reluctantly reveals the tragic story. Determined to rescue his parents, Rata immediately begins preparing for an extraordinary voyage. One of the most memorable episodes concerns the construction of Rata's canoe. After selecting a magnificent tree, he cuts it down, only to discover the next morning that it has mysteriously returned to its original place, standing perfectly upright as though untouched. This miracle repeats itself again and again until Rata realizes that unseen spirits are protecting the forest. Once he earns their respect, supernatural beings rebuild the tree into a magnificent canoe overnight, completing in a single evening what ordinary craftsmen could never accomplish. Versions of this magical canoe story are found not only across Polynesia, but also in Melanesia and Indonesia, suggesting that the tale spread widely throughout the Austronesian world. A unique version from Aitutaki adds another layer to the legend. On his way to gather timber, Rata encounters a heron locked in a desperate struggle with a snake. The bird begs for help, but Rata ignores its plea and continues his work. Each time he fells the chosen tree, however, it mysteriously stands again the following day. Finally realizing that his failure is connected to the abandoned heron, he returns, kills the snake, and rescues the exhausted bird. In gratitude, the heron summons countless birds from across the island. Together they transform the fallen tree into a finished canoe and carry it directly to Rata's home, rewarding the hero only after he has shown compassion. Rata's voyage itself becomes even more adventurous in the Cook Islands tradition. As his crew prepares to depart, a man named Nganawa repeatedly begs to join the expedition, promising to perform even the humblest tasks aboard the canoe. Rata refuses every request and sails away without him. Soon afterward, however, the crew discovers that Nganawa secretly hid aboard the vessel. Furious, Rata throws him into the sea. Before long, the sailors notice a giant floating gourd drifting across the waves, and pull it aboard, only to discover Nganawa hidden inside it. Amused by his determination, Rata finally allows him to stay. Nganawa soon proves that his persistence was worthwhile. As the canoe sails farther from land, terrifying sea monsters emerge one after another. A gigantic clam attempts to trap the vessel between its shells, an enormous octopus tries to drag the canoe beneath the waves, and finally, an immense whale opens its mouth, ready to swallow the entire expedition. Nganawa confronts every danger. He wedges the whale's jaws apart with his spear before diving directly into its throat. Deep inside the creature's belly, he discovers his own parents, who had been swallowed long before while fishing at sea. Using fire-making sticks, he lights a blaze inside the whale. Maddened by the flames, the giant creature races toward shore, allowing everyone trapped within it to escape alive. This remarkable sequence, being swallowed by a sea monster, creating fire inside its body and emerging safely, appears in many mythological traditions across both Melanesia and Indonesia, demonstrating just how widespread this ancient storytelling motif became. The New Zealand traditions conclude with Rata facing two fearsome cannibal giants. One attempts to lure the hero onto a concealed pit covered with woven mats, hoping he and his companions will fall to their deaths. Similar hidden trap episodes appear elsewhere in Melanesian folklore and may even trace back to Indonesia. Another memorable battle ends when a monstrous enemy is defeated through the clever use of red-hot stones rather than brute strength alone. This dramatic method of overcoming seemingly invincible monsters appears repeatedly across Polynesia, Melanesia, and Indonesia, revealing how many of these legendary adventures were shared, adapted, and retold as generations of seafaring peoples carried their stories across the vast Pacific Ocean. After the adventures of Tauhaki and Rata, Polynesian mythology branches into a collection of independent legends, each exploring themes of love, loss, courage, and journeys into mysterious worlds. Although these stories are not connected by a single narrative, they reveal many of the beliefs that shaped the imagination of the ancient island societies. Their happiness does not last long. Tinirau, the powerful ruler of the region, hears rumors of Hinauri's beauty and decides she should become his own wife. Already married to 2 women, Tinirau unknowingly creates fierce jealousy within his household. His older wives plot to eliminate the newcomer, but Hinauri possesses powerful supernatural abilities. Rather than becoming their victim, she uses her magic to defeat both rivals and secures her place beside the chief. While Maui himself shows little concern over his sister's disappearance, his younger brother Rupa cannot forget her. Determined to bring her home, he searches far and wide across the earth before concluding that only the gods may know where she has gone. His quest eventually leads him upward through the many layers of the heavens until he reaches the highest realm inhabited by the ancient ancestor Rehua, one of the divine children of Rangi and Papa. Rehua welcomes his visitor with extraordinary hospitality. To prepare a meal, he simply shakes his long hair, causing countless birds to fall from it. Although invited to eat, Rupe politely refuses. Rehua's head is sacred, and the birds have come directly from it, making them forbidden food in Rupe's eyes. Respecting this decision, Rehua instead tells him exactly where Hinauri now lives. Armed with this knowledge, Rupe transforms himself into a pigeon and flies back to the world below. The people serving Tinirau attempt to kill the strange bird with their spears, but he easily avoids every attack. Hinauri soon recognizes her brother despite his disguise. Seizing the perfect moment, Rupe carries both his sister and her child safely away, returning with them to Rehua's heavenly home. There he completes an enormous task by cleaning the neglected courtyard, which generations of neglect had turned into an almost impossible mess. A similar legend survives on the island of Mangaia, although its details differ considerably. In this version, the heroine is called Ina. One day, her parents leave her alone to guard their treasured ornaments, warning her to protect them carefully. A notorious thief named Nanga has long desired these valuables, but his magical powers work only when the sunlight is hidden by clouds. Waiting patiently until the sky darkens, he approaches Ina and politely asks to admire the jewelry. She agrees, never suspecting his intentions. Using clever deception, Nanga escapes with the precious ornaments, leaving Ina responsible for the disaster. When her parents return and discover the theft, they react with anger rather than sympathy. Unable to bear their punishment and humiliation, Ina runs away and prays for help from the creatures of the sea. Fish of every size answer her call, each attempting to carry her across the ocean to the island of Tinirau, the great king of fishes. Yet one after another, they prove too weak to complete the journey. Eventually, a mighty shark offers his strength. During the voyage, Ina carries 2 coconuts for food and fresh water. At one point, she cracks one open against the shark's head, accidentally provoking his anger. The furious creature dives beneath the waves, throwing Ina into the open sea. Just when she seems certain to drown, an even larger shark rises from the depths and gently carries her the rest of the way. Reaching Tinirau's island, Ina discovers that the ruler himself is absent. Waiting outside his home is a great ceremonial drum, which she strikes loudly to announce her arrival. Hearing the unexpected sound, Tinirau rushes back, curious to discover who has entered his domain. Instead of finding an enemy, he meets the remarkable young woman and soon makes her his wife. Meanwhile, Ina's younger brother Rup refuses to believe she has disappeared forever. Unlike the New Zealand version, he does not transform himself physically, but instead sends his spirit into a small bird that flies across the sea. The bird locates Ina, reveals its true identity, and returns home carrying the joyful news that she is alive and well. Soon afterward, Rup brings their parents to visit their daughter, and together they celebrate the birth of her children with a great family festival. Although versions of this story appear on a few other Polynesian islands, they are surprisingly uncommon. Nevertheless, several of their central themes appear throughout the wider Pacific. Heroes frequently search for lost women while disguised as birds, and magical sea creatures often carry travelers safely across impossible distances. Even the unusual detail of striking a shark with a coconut before being thrown into the sea has close parallels in traditions preserved outside Polynesia. Another group of legends shifts attention away from the sea and instead explores one of mythology's oldest ideas: the descent into the land of the dead. Like the stories of Orpheus in Greek mythology, these tales describe heroes willing to enter the underworld in search of those they love. One New Zealand tradition begins with Mataora, who encounters a mysterious people known as the Turehu, inhabitants of the underworld. Curious about the sleeping stranger they have discovered, they debate whether he is truly human. Once awake, Mataora welcomes them generously with food. The visitors refuse his cooked meal, however, because they eat only raw food, forcing him to offer fresh fish instead. Among the visitors is an extraordinarily beautiful woman named Nuvarahu. Mataora falls deeply in love with her, and before long the two marry. For a time they live happily together, but jealousy eventually poisons their relationship. Believing his wife has become too close to his brother, Mataora strikes her during an argument. Humiliated and heartbroken, Nuvarahu abandons him and returns to her homeland beneath the earth. Almost immediately, Mataora regrets his actions. Determined to win back the woman he loves, he begins a dangerous journey into the underworld. After questioning travelers and following every clue he can find, he finally reaches the hidden realm known as Po, and eventually arrives at the home of his father-in-law, Tonga. There, Mataora witnesses something completely unfamiliar. Until this point, the people of the world above have decorated their faces only with paint that eventually fades away. Tonga, however, practices a far more permanent art. Instead of painting designs onto the skin, he carefully carves them into the flesh before rubbing pigment into the wounds. The result is the first true moko, the sacred facial tattoo that would later become one of the defining traditions of Maori culture. The people of the underworld laugh when Mataora's painted decorations smear and disappear with a single touch. Ashamed, he asks Wetonga to tattoo him properly. Enduring the painful process while singing to distract himself, he unknowingly attracts Nuvarahu's attention. Hearing his familiar voice, she realizes that her husband has crossed into the realm of the dead to find her. As his wounds heal, the two reconcile and spend peaceful days together once again. Eventually, however, Mataora longs to return to the world above. After much persuasion, Nuvarahu agrees to accompany him. During their climb, they meet a talking bird that warns them to delay their journey because danger still fills the upper world. They follow the advice, waiting until the proper season before continuing. Along the way, they also bring with them several birds, including the owl, the bat, the rail, and the fantail, explaining how these creatures first reached the human world. Their return is almost successful. At the final gateway separating the worlds, Nuvarahu attempts to carry a sacred garment from the underworld into the land of the living. The Guardian immediately notices the forbidden object and forces her to leave it behind. Once the couple has crossed the threshold, the entrance is permanently sealed. From that moment onward, no living person can freely travel into the realm below. Only the spirits of the dead may pass through its gates. Another famous legend tells a similar story through the god Tain. After creating the first woman from the earth itself, Tain fathers a daughter named Haine Itawira. In later tradition, he also takes her as his wife, but when she eventually discovers that her husband is also her father, she is overcome with unbearable shame. Unable to endure the revelation, she leaves the world of light forever and descends into the underworld, where she becomes Hainenui Tepo, the mighty goddess who rules over death and the night. Grieving her loss, Tain journeys after her, passing guardian after guardian until he reaches her hidden dwelling. He begs her to return with him, but she refuses. Someone, she explains, must remain below to welcome every human soul after death, while he must stay above to care for the living. Accepting that they can never again share the same world, Tane departs in sorrow, singing a mournful farewell that echoes through both heaven and earth. A final Cook Islands legend offers another dramatic rescue from the world beneath the surface. A woman named Kura is gathering fragrant flowers when a branch suddenly snaps beneath her. The ground opens and she falls into the underworld, where its inhabitants capture her, bind her to a post, and plan to eat her later. To ensure she cannot escape, they leave her under the watch of an old blind guardian who repeatedly calls her name, expecting her to answer each time. Her husband, Ineen, refuses to abandon hope. Guided by a protective spirit, he descends into the underworld and secretly searches for his missing wife. Eventually, he hears the blind guard calling Kura's name and realizes where she is imprisoned. Rather than attacking directly, Ineen devises a clever plan. He gathers coconuts, scrapes out their flesh, and scatters it along every path leading to the prison. The irresistible scent attracts countless rats, whose noisy scramble creates complete confusion. Hidden by the chaos, Ineen slips through the roof, cuts Kura's bonds, and sends her running toward the passage back to the world above. Remaining behind, he cleverly imitates her voice whenever the blind guard calls, delaying any suspicion until she has escaped. Finally, he slips away himself, catches up with Kura, and together they race toward the surface, barely escaping the furious inhabitants of the underworld before reaching the safety of daylight once more. Among the many Polynesian legends about journeys to the underworld, one of the most captivating comes from Hawaii. It tells the story of Hiku and Kawelu, a tale of love so powerful that it challenges death itself. Hiku spent his childhood in complete isolation, living deep in the mountains with his mother. She kept him hidden from the outside world, and for years he never encountered another human being. As he grew older, however, his curiosity became impossible to ignore. Longing to discover what lay beyond the mountains, he finally set out on a journey unlike any other. His guide was no ordinary weapon. Hiku carried a magical arrow that seemed to possess a will of its own. He would shoot it high into the sky, then simply walk to wherever it landed. Once he reached it, he repeated the process again and again, allowing the enchanted arrow to lead him farther from home than he had ever imagined. Eventually, the arrow landed in front of a beautiful young woman named Kawelu. Intrigued, she secretly picked it up and hid it before Hiku arrived. Confused by its disappearance, Hiku called out to the arrow, and to everyone's astonishment, it answered. Its voice revealed exactly where it had been hidden, exposing Kawelu's playful trick. Their unusual first meeting quickly blossomed into romance, and before long, they were married. For a time, the couple lived happily together. But Hiku remembered a promise he had made to his mother, that one day he would return to visit her. Kawelu begged him not to leave, fearing she might never see him again. She even tried to prevent his departure by keeping him inside their home. Despite her desperate efforts, Hiku managed to slip away unnoticed. When Kawelu discovered that he had gone, grief overwhelmed her. She refused comfort, and before long her broken heart claimed her life. By the time Hiku learned what had happened and rushed home, it was already too late. All he could do was mourn beside the body of the woman he loved. Her family blamed him entirely for her death. Their accusations only deepened his guilt until he made an extraordinary decision. Rather than accepting fate, Hiku vowed to travel into the land of the dead and bring Kawelu's spirit back. Preparing for such a journey required more than courage. With the help of friends, Hiku twisted together an incredibly long rope that could reach the entrance to the underworld. He also carried an empty coconut shell and covered his body with foul-smelling rancid oil. The terrible odor was intentional. Hiku hoped it would convince the spirits that he, too, was already dead. His disguise worked perfectly. Even Miru, the ruler of the underworld, believed the newcomer belonged among the dead. Meanwhile, the enormous rope hanging from the world above fascinated the spirits. It became an enormous swing unlike anything they had ever seen, and one by one the inhabitants eagerly took turns riding it. Eventually, Kawelu herself approached the swing. She immediately recognized Hiku, but was delighted simply to spend time with him again. As she enjoyed soaring through the air, Hiku secretly gave the signal to his friends waiting above. Without warning, they began pulling the rope back toward the world of the living. Only then did Kawelu realize she had been deceived. Hoping to escape, she transformed herself into a butterfly and attempted to flutter away into the darkness of the underworld. Hiku had anticipated exactly this move. He quickly trapped the butterfly inside his hollow coconut shell before it could disappear. Pulled rapidly back to the surface, Hiku hurried to where Kawelu's body still lay. According to the tradition, he pierced the great toe of her left foot, creating an opening through which her reluctant spirit could return. Forced back into its body, the soul restored Kawelu to life, and husband and wife were reunited once again. A remarkably similar story appears thousands of kilometers away in New Zealand. There, the heroine is named Pare, a woman of such noble birth that no suitable husband could be found among her own people. During a great festival, a distinguished visitor named Hutu arrived and joined the athletic competitions. One event involved throwing a slender dart known as a neti. Hutu launched his throw with such skill that the dart sailed across the gathering and landed directly at Pare's feet. Instead of returning it, Pare quietly hid the dart inside her house. When Hutu arrived searching for it, she confessed that she had fallen in love with him and asked him to marry her. Despite her sincerity, Hutu refused every request and escaped from her home. His destination was the realm of the dead. Hutu first sought the guidance of the great goddess Hinenui Tepo, ruler of the underworld. Offering valuable gifts, he persuaded her to reveal the path leading into her domain. She also warned him never to eat the food belonging to the dead, explaining that anyone who accepted such a meal would never again return to the world of the living. Following her instructions, Hutu entered the underworld and eventually located Pare. Yet no matter how passionately he pleaded, she refused to return. He then tried entertaining the spirits by joining their games, hoping curiosity might eventually draw her outside. Finally, he devised an ingenious plan. A tall tree or pole was bent nearly to the ground using heavy ropes. Sitting on its tip with another spirit clinging to his back, Hutu ordered everyone to release the ropes simultaneously. The pole snapped upright with tremendous force, launching the pair high into the air. The spectacle amazed everyone watching, and word of this extraordinary new game quickly spread throughout the underworld. Before long, even Pare became curious enough to see it for herself. Fascinated by the unusual display, she eventually asked Hutu if she might ride with him. That was exactly what he had hoped for. Once Pare climbed onto his back, the tree was bent down once more. At the perfect moment, the ropes were released, sending them soaring upward with incredible speed. This time, the ropes flew so high that they caught among the grasses and roots growing in the world above. Hutu immediately seized the opportunity, climbing upward before anyone below could stop him. Carrying Pare's spirit with him, he returned to the land of the living, where her soul re-entered her waiting body. Restored to life, Pare finally became Hutu's wife. Versions of this remarkable journey to recover a lost loved one appear across several parts of Polynesia, including Samoa, demonstrating that the theme was widely known throughout the region. Similar traditions also survive in parts of Melanesia, particularly in the New Hebrides, the Banks Islands, and northeastern New Guinea. Unlike the Polynesian versions, however, some Melanesian communities claim these extraordinary journeys had been accomplished not by mythical heroes, but by real people who had lived within living memory. Curiously, despite the widespread distribution of the story across the Pacific, closely related legends have not been clearly documented in Indonesia, making its absence there particularly intriguing. One particularly revealing Maori legend follows the adventures of a traveler named Tura. During a long voyage, Tura reached a distant land inhabited by people whose customs were entirely unfamiliar to him. They looked human, yet their way of life seemed strangely primitive. They ate their food raw and knew nothing of cooking, so Tura introduced them to fire and taught them how it could transform both food and daily life. Tura eventually married a woman from this unusual community. As the birth of their child approached, Several of her female relatives arrived carrying sharp obsidian blades. Tura was disturbed by the sight and asked why they had brought such dangerous tools. His wife calmly explained that, according to the tradition of her people, a pregnant woman's body had to be cut open to remove the child. The mother was not expected to survive. Tura was horrified. He told his wife that childbirth did not require her death and explained how children were born among ordinary human beings. He then constructed a private shelter where she could give birth safely. The child arrived naturally, and both mother and baby survived. Through Tura's knowledge, a practice that had once seemed unavoidable was finally overcome. A closely related tradition appears in Rarotonga. Near one village stood a mysterious spring that served as an entrance to the underworld. During nights of the full moon, a man and woman emerged from the water and stole crops from nearby gardens. They carried the food below and ate everything raw. Eventually, the villagers decided to stop the thefts. They placed a strong net across the spring and waited. When the mysterious couple returned, the man escaped, but the woman became trapped. She was strikingly beautiful, and the village chief took her as his wife. Underworld, but he would not allow it. The child was born naturally, and the woman's life was spared. Similar stories survived in Niue, Rotuma, Micronesia, and the Santa Cruz Islands. In some versions, the mysterious people lived in the sky rather than beneath the earth. In others, they were described as cannibals. Yet the central idea remained the same. An outsider entered a strange society and replaced a deadly custom with a safer human practice. A very different Maori tale concerns love, betrayal, revenge, and an unexpected return from death. Its central figure is Tama Nui Arangi, whose wife was named Rukutia. One day, a handsome visitor called Tute Koropunga arrived at their home. While Tama Nui Arangi was temporarily absent, the visitor seduced Rukutia and carried her away. When her husband returned, his children revealed what had happened. They told him with painful honesty that their mother had left because she considered him unattractive and preferred the noble appearance of the stranger. Deeply humiliated, Tamanui Arangi left his children behind and began a strange journey. Transforming himself into a crane, he flew to a distant region, where hunters trapped and captured him. He then returned to human form and explained that he had come to learn the secret of their permanent facial markings. The designs on his own face disappeared whenever he washed, while theirs remained forever. The people directed him to skilled ancestors who understood the sacred art of moko. Tama Nui Arangi asked them to carve permanent designs into his face. The procedure was agonizing. He lost consciousness several times as the patterns were cut into his skin, but when the work was finally complete, his appearance had been completely transformed. He was now considered even more impressive than the man who had stolen his wife. After comforting his children, Tamanui Arangi set out to find Rukutia. Tute Koropunga had placed numerous obstacles along the path, but none of them could stop him. When he finally reached the settlement where his wife lived, he disguised himself as a filthy and exhausted old man. That evening, he entered the house of his enemy without being recognized. Rukutia rose to dance, but Tamanui Arangi secretly used his supernatural power against her. She suddenly became overwhelmed with sadness and could no longer continue. Later, he removed his disguise and revealed himself privately. Rukutia begged him to take her home. Life with Tute Koropunga had become miserable, she explained, because he treated her cruelly and frequently beat her. Tamanui Arangi refused to rescue her immediately. She had abandoned him because of his appearance, he reminded her, and had freely chosen another man. Yet, he offered her one final chance. Before sunrise, she was to climb onto a raised food platform and chant a signal calling for the morning light to reveal the path of her husband's canoe. He then left and returned home, where he assembled a crew. Soon, his canoe was again approaching the island. At dawn, Rukutia climbed onto the platform and repeated the words he had taught her. Tute Koropunga heard the chant but refused to believe that his rival had successfully passed all the obstacles. From the sea, Tamanui Arangi called for Rukutia to jump into the water and swim toward his canoe. She obeyed. but when she reached the vessel, he seized her by the hair and cut off her head with an axe. His revenge was complete, yet it brought him no peace. He carefully carried the head home and buried it beside his house. Instead of feeling victorious, he became consumed by guilt and loneliness. Day after day he mourned the woman he had killed, remembering both her betrayal and the love they had once shared. His lament compared their separation to the ancient division of Rangi and Papa, the Sky Father and Earth Mother. Like those cosmic parents, they had been torn apart, perhaps forever. Revenge had not healed his wounds, it had only replaced anger with grief. Then, when spring arrived and the trees began to bloom, Tamanuia Rangi heard a faint buzzing sound near the place where Rukutia's head had been buried. He uncovered the ground and discovered her alive, sitting beneath the earth and smiling. Rukutia rose to meet him. Each forgave the other, and together they began their life again. The story ends, not with punishment, but with restoration, suggesting that even betrayal, violence, and death could sometimes be overcome through renewal. Another legend returns to Hine, the sister of Rupa. She became the wife of Tinarau, but after some time he lost interest in her and turned his attention to another woman. When Hine realized she was pregnant, she asked Tinarau to prepare a special shelter and provide the food she would need. He fulfilled these duties, but then abandoned her again. Hurt by his neglect, Hine gave birth alone and called upon her brother Rup. Appearing in the form of a pigeon, Rup carried both Hine and the newborn child away. Tinarau desperately begged her to return, but she refused. At the last moment, however, she dropped the baby toward him. Tinarau caught the child safely and raised him with great affection. The boy was named Tuhuruhuru. As he grew older, he surpassed the other children in almost every game. Jealous of his success, they mocked him by claiming that he had no mother. Their words deeply wounded him. Tuhuruhuru confronted Tinarau and demanded to know the truth. His father initially avoided the question, but eventually revealed where Hine lived. Determined to find her, the boy prepared to leave immediately. Tinarau gave him careful instructions. He was to cover his skin with soot so that he would be mistaken for a servant. He was also told how to behave around Rupi and what chant to repeat if he ever saw his mother dancing. Tuhuruhuru followed the advice and reached the village where Hine lived. Because of his appearance, he was taken into Rupa's household as a slave. When ordered to pour water for Rup, the boy deliberately poured it over his nose, exactly as Tinarau had instructed. Rupa became furious and struck him. Through his tears, the boy quietly said that he had believed Rupe was his relative, Hine his mother, and Tinarau his father. Rupa did not hear the words. Later, Hine began to dance. Tuhuruhuru repeated the special chant his father had taught him. Angered by the interruption, she also struck the boy. Again he murmured that he had believed her to be his mother. This time Hine heard him. She suddenly realized that the child before her was the son she had left behind. Her anger vanished, and the reunion brought her overwhelming joy. Hine and Rupa accompanied the boy back to Tinarau's home, where a formal naming and initiation ceremony was held. The ritual was performed by a man named Kay. Afterward, Kay wished to return home and asked Tinarau to lend him his beloved whale. The creature was no ordinary animal, but Tinarau's trusted companion, carrying him wherever he wished to travel. Tinarau was reluctant, yet eventually agreed. He carefully explained how the whale must be treated and warned Kay never to harm it. Kay ignored every instruction. After reaching his destination, he drove the whale onto the beach, killed it, divided the flesh, and prepared a feast with his companions. Tinarau waited for his pet to return, but many days passed without any sign of it. Then a southern wind carried the smell of roasting whale meat across the sea. Tinarau immediately understood what had happened and began planning his revenge. Kay was too cautious to capture by force, so Tinarau sent a group of women to locate him. They were told that Kay could be identified by a broken tooth. To expose it, they performed dances and comic songs designed to make everyone laugh. Their plan worked. As the crowd laughed, Kay opened his mouth, revealing the broken tooth. That night, the women recited a spell that placed everyone in the house into a deep sleep. They carried Kay to their canoe and transported him back to Tinarau's settlement while he remained unconscious. To confuse him, they placed him in a room arranged to resemble his own home. When he awakened, Tinarau asked whether he recognized the bed. Still disoriented, Kay answered that it was indeed his own. Tinarau then invited him to eat. Kay was directed toward a seat made from leaves and ferns. Hidden beneath it was a pit filled with heated stones. Once Kay sat down and reached for the food, the women poured water over the leaves. The liquid reached the burning stones below, releasing a violent cloud of steam. Kay was trapped above the hidden oven and scalded to death, paying for his betrayal of Tinarau's sacred whale. Another Maori story introduces Humea, a terrifying figure whose greed gradually reveals her true nature. Her husband, Uta, regularly went fishing to feed Humea and their 2 sons. One day, he returned with a large catch and called for his wife to help carry it home. She did not come. When Uta went to confront her, she blamed the children, claiming their disobedience had prevented her from helping. After Uta returned to the house, Humea went secretly to the canoe and devoured every fish. She then trampled plants, scattered grass, and created footprints of different sizes along the shore. Returning breathlessly, she claimed that a supernatural raiding party had stolen the catch. Uta pretended to believe her. The following day, the same thing happened. Again, she refused to help, and again she blamed the children. This time, Uta secretly sent the boys to watch her. They saw Humea eat all the fish and immediately reported the truth to their father. When Humea returned with another false story, Uta confronted her. She denied everything but privately decided to punish the children for exposing her. After Uta left to fish the next morning, Humea sent one son away to collect water. She called the other boy close and swallowed him whole. When his brother returned, she swallowed him as well. When Uta came home, he found Humea lying on the floor and pretending to be ill. She claimed the children had wandered away, but Uta knew she was lying. Using a powerful spell, he forced her to vomit up both boys. Remarkably, they emerged alive and unharmed. Uta now understood that remaining near Humea was too dangerous. He planned to flee with his sons. Before leaving, he instructed the boys to refuse the next time he ordered them to fetch water. As expected, Humea became impatient and went herself. Through magic, Uta caused every pool and stream to retreat as she approached. Humea was forced to travel farther and farther in search of water, giving Uta enough time to escape. Before leaving, he ordered the house, trees, and surrounding objects to answer whenever Humea called their names. Then, he and the children hurried to the canoe and paddled toward the open sea. When Humea finally returned, she called for her family. Voices seemed to answer from every direction. She searched the house, the trees, and the surrounding land, believing each reply came from the fugitives. Eventually, she discovered the deception and saw their canoe far out on the horizon. Transforming herself into a shag, a seabird, she flew after them. As the creature approached, Uta became so terrified that he hid beneath the canoe's deck. Humea opened her enormous mouth and demanded that the children give her food. They threw several fish toward her, but she remained unsatisfied. The boys then promised her a much larger fish. They told her to open her mouth as widely as possible. Instead of food, they lifted a burning stone from the canoe's oven with wooden tongs and threw it directly down her throat. The heat destroyed her from within, ending the threat forever. Another Maori tradition, associated with the legendary departure from the ancestral homeland, begins with the death of a dog. The animal belonged to Humai Tahiti, but had committed an act considered offensive toward Wenuku. As punishment, Wenuku and Toite Huatahi killed and ate it. The owner's sons, Tamate Kapua and Wakaturia, searched everywhere for the missing dog. When they reached the village of Toite Huatahi, they called the animal's name. To their astonishment, the dog answered from inside the man's stomach. Toite Huatahi tried to keep his mouth tightly shut, but the howling continued from within his body. The brothers immediately understood who had eaten their dog and secretly planned revenge. They constructed tall stilts and used them at night to steal fruit from Wenuku's prized papora tree. Because their feet never touched the ground, they left behind no ordinary tracks. Night after night, they returned until most of the fruit had disappeared. Eventually, Wenuku discovered the marks made by the stilts and organized an ambush. Wakaturia was captured first, while Tama Te Kapua fled toward the coast. His pursuers caught him standing on his stilts and discussed how to bring him down. Tama Te Kapua cleverly told them that falling into the sea would not injure him, while falling onto the shore would certainly kill him. Believing they were choosing the deadlier option, they cut the stilts so that he fell onto the land. The moment he hit the ground, Tama Te Kapua jumped up and escaped. Wakaturia was less fortunate. His captors suspended him beneath the roof of Wenuku's house, intending to let smoke from the fire slowly suffocate him. Each evening they gathered below, singing and dancing with little skill. When Tama Te Kapua learned that his brother might still be alive, he secretly climbed onto the roof and made a small opening. Wakaturia whispered that he was still alive and complained that his captors performed terrible songs and dances every night. This gave Tama Te Kapua an idea. During the next gathering, Wakaturia loudly mocked the dancers, telling them they had no talent. Offended, they challenged him to prove that he could perform better. He agreed, but said he would need to be released and given proper clothing and equipment. Confident that he could not escape, they lowered him from the roof. Wakaturia began to perform with such skill that everyone became absorbed in watching. He then complained that the room was too hot and asked them to open the door slightly. Tama Te Kapua was waiting outside. At a prearranged signal, Wakaturia rushed through the opening. Tama Te Kapua immediately slammed the door shut and barred it from outside. The brothers escaped together while their enemies remained trapped in the house. One element of this story is especially significant. Tama Te Kapua survives by persuading his captors to use the one method that will not kill him. This clever reversal is rare in Polynesian traditions, but appears frequently in Indonesian folklore and in many other storytelling cultures around the world. Polynesian mythology also contains numerous explanations for events seen in the night sky. One of the best-known Maori traditions tells how a woman named Rona was carried away by the moon. One night, Rona went to a stream to collect water. The moon was shining brightly, but as she walked, clouds suddenly covered it. Left in darkness, she stumbled over stones and tree roots. Angry and embarrassed, Rona cursed the moon for hiding its light. The moon heard the insult. It descended from the sky, seized Rona, and began carrying her upward. Desperately, she grabbed the trunk of a nearby tree, but the moon pulled so strongly that the entire tree was torn from the ground. Rona, the tree, her basket, and her water container were all taken into the sky. According to the tradition, their shapes can still be seen on the surface of the moon. Other versions identify Rona as a man rather than a woman. In some stories, he follows his wife to the moon and becomes trapped there. He is also connected with the lunar cycle. Rona slowly consumes the moon, causing it to grow smaller, while the moon devours him in return. Both are later restored by bathing in the life-giving waters of Tain, after which their endless struggle begins again. The Cook Islands preserve another explanation for the figures visible on the moon. In this tale, the moon falls in love with one of the beautiful daughters of Kui the Blind. Descending to Earth, he carries her into the sky and makes her his companion. She can still be seen there, surrounded by leaves gathered for her earth oven and holding the tools used to arrange its hot stones. She also spends her time preparing tapa cloth. The stones used to hold the fabric in place while it dries are said to be visible beside her. From time to time, she throws these stones aside. Their tremendous collision echoes across the heavens, creating the sound that people on Earth recognize as thunder. Not every Hawaiian legend revolves around gods or the creation of the world. Some focus on ordinary families, personal struggles, and local landmarks, yet even these seemingly simple stories preserve themes that appear across much of the Pacific. One such legend tells of the famous spring of Punahou. A respected chief lost his first wife, leaving him to raise their young twins, a boy and a girl. Wanting his children to have a mother's care, he married again, believing he had secured a happier future for them. Instead, the opposite happened. Whenever the chief was present, his new wife behaved with kindness toward the twins. But once he departed on a long journey, her true feelings emerged. Driven by jealousy, she constantly abused the children, making their lives unbearable. Fortunately, they were not completely alone. The spirit of their deceased mother continued to watch over them, quietly protecting and guiding them whenever danger approached. Even with this unseen help, the twins could no longer endure their stepmother's cruelty. They fled from home, moving from one hiding place to another as she relentlessly searched for them. Eventually, they found refuge inside a secluded cave. When that sanctuary was discovered as well, they escaped to an even more hidden cavern. There, they finally found peace. Assisted by a benevolent water spirit, the brother caused a fresh spring to emerge and created a bathing pool where his sister could live in safety. According to Hawaiian tradition, that spring still exists today. Another Hawaiian legend combines romance, adventure, and supernatural feats on an epic scale. It begins on the towering sea cliffs of Molokai, where a powerful man named Kapipikawila lived high above the ocean. Kapipikawila became obsessed with a beautiful woman named Hina, even though she was already married to another man, Hakalanileo. Ignoring her existing marriage, he carried Hina away and made her his own wife. Heartbroken, Hakalanileo searched everywhere for someone powerful enough to challenge the kidnapper. One by one, he met famous heroes renowned for extraordinary strength. One warrior demonstrated his power by throwing an enormous boulder into the sky before catching it against the stone side of his own body. Yet even this astonishing feat failed to convince the desperate husband. Finally, he encountered Nikyu, a cunning adventurer known as the Rogue. Nikyu brought him before an even greater champion named Kawa. The moment Kawa heard the story, he agreed to help. He ordered canoes to be prepared immediately. When the work proceeded too slowly, he simply stretched out his arm into the distant forest and pulled two fully formed canoes from among the trees, placing them directly onto the beach. The rescue expedition set sail. Their voyage was anything but peaceful. A massive coral reef blocked their route, but Kawa shattered it with his enchanted staff. Soon afterward, an enormous wall of water rose before them. Again, the magical staff opened a safe passage. One sea monster after another attempted to destroy the expedition, yet each was overcome by Kawa's supernatural power. Eventually, the party reached the towering cliffs where Kapipikawila lived. Niku volunteered to climb the nearly vertical rock face. His first attempt failed. So did his second. On the third try, however, he reached the summit and quietly entered Kapipikawila's house. Before anyone realized what was happening, he led Hina toward the edge of the cliffs. But their escape did not last. Kapipikawila unleashed a flock of sacred birds, ordering them to attack Nikyu's head. Because his head had become ritually sacred, the bird's touch violated its holiness. Ashamed by this desecration, Nikyu instinctively released Hina, allowing the birds to carry her back. Returning to Kawa below, Nikyu first tried to hide the truth. Eventually, he admitted exactly what had happened. Now, Kawa decided to confront Kapipikawila himself. Standing inside his canoe, he began stretching his body upward. Higher and higher, he grew until his head nearly reached the summit of the cliffs. Kapipikawila answered with magic of his own. Growing on the cliff stood a supernatural tree. Each time he cut away one of its branches, the cliff itself grew taller. Kawa stretched farther. The cliff rose again. The strange contest continued without pause. Soon, Kawa's enormous body became impossibly thin. First, he resembled a banana stalk. Then he became no thicker than a spider's thread. Yet the cliff continued rising, and eventually Kawa admitted defeat. Completely exhausted, he stretched his gigantic body across the ocean until his head reached the island of Hawaii. There his grandmother cared for him, feeding him until he slowly regained his strength. Meanwhile, Nikyu remained behind near Kawa's distant feet. Hunger eventually overcame him. Seeing that Kawa's body had become healthy once more, Nikyu cut off one of the giant's feet and ate it. The injury was so far away that the pain traveled gradually through Kawa's enormous body. Only after a long time did it finally reach his head, revealing what had happened. Fully recovered, Kawa returned for one final battle. This time, he destroyed every branch of the magical tree before Kapipikawila could use it. Without its power, the cliff could no longer grow. Kauai stretched higher than ever before, rising above the mountaintop itself. The battle ended swiftly. Kapipikawila was killed, Hina was rescued, and she was finally reunited with Hakalanileo. To complete his victory, Kauai tore enormous sections from the cliff and hurled them into the sea. According to Hawaiian tradition, those rocky islands still stand today and are remembered as the Rocks of Kauai. The remarkable image of a hero stretching his body to impossible lengths is almost unknown elsewhere in Polynesian mythology. Similar episodes, however, appear in stories from Melanesia and Micronesia, suggesting that even this unusual tale may preserve echoes of much older traditions shared across the Pacific. These legends illustrate an important reality about Polynesian mythology as a whole. Rather than forming a single, unified tradition, Polynesian myths are a vast collection of stories that evolved over centuries. Heroes, gods, magical creatures, and supernatural adventures often traveled from island to island, changing as they went. The same basic story could appear in several different regions while acquiring new characters, new settings, and entirely new meanings. A single episode might disappear in one version, survive in another, or merge with elements borrowed from completely different traditions. Over generations, myths became living narratives that constantly adapted to the cultures preserving them. Because of this, modern scholars often study myths not as complete stories, but as collections of smaller narrative elements. Individual scenes, a hero climbing into the sky, a magical canoe, a journey to the underworld, a giant sea monster, or a miraculous resurrection can be traced across hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. Following these recurring motifs provides valuable clues about ancient migrations, cultural contact, and the movement of ideas throughout Oceania. When these patterns are compared across Polynesia, several fascinating trends emerge. One of the most surprising is the close relationship between Hawaiian and Maori traditions. Despite being separated by one of the greatest distances anywhere in the Pacific, the two regions share an unexpectedly large number of mythological themes. In contrast, some island groups located much closer together preserve fewer stories in common. New Zealand also shares many traditions with the Cook Islands, a result that matches historical evidence suggesting that many Maori ancestors originated there. Samoa, meanwhile, shows strong connections with both New Zealand and the Cook Islands, while the islands of central Polynesia, including the Society Islands, the Cook Islands, and the Marquesas, appear to form their own closely linked storytelling network. The stories themselves reveal something equally important. Hawaii often preserves myths that appear to retain older Indonesian features absent elsewhere in Polynesia. By contrast, New Zealand and Samoa contain a much stronger influence from Melanesian traditions. This suggests that Polynesian mythology did not emerge from a single source, but instead developed through centuries of interaction with neighboring cultures. Many researchers believe the ancestors of the Polynesians migrated eastward from island Southeast Asia, gradually moving through Melanesia before spreading across the Pacific. As they traveled, they encountered new peoples, exchanged ideas, and incorporated unfamiliar stories into their own traditions. According to one interpretation, these migrations occurred in more than one wave. An earlier movement may have reached Hawaii after only limited contact with northern Melanesia, preserving many older Indonesian traditions. Later migrations spent far longer in Melanesia before continuing into Samoa, central Polynesia, and eventually New Zealand, where Melanesian influences became much more deeply woven into local mythology. Although this model does not explain every legend perfectly, it offers a compelling framework for understanding why different parts of Polynesia preserve different combinations of stories while still sharing a common cultural foundation. For that reason, modern scholars generally avoid treating every myth as a simple explanation of the sun, the moon, storms, or other natural phenomena. Stories constantly changed as they passed from one generation to another. Characters were replaced, episodes disappeared, and new ideas were added. A legend that originally explained one event could eventually become associated with something entirely different. Rather than fixed texts, Polynesian myths should be understood as living traditions, stories carried across the Pacific by generations of voyagers, reshaped by every island they reached, yet still preserving echoes of an ancient shared heritage stretching back thousands of years.